Daenerys Targaryen stood on the ramparts of the Red Keep, gazing out over the city she once believed she would conquer by fire and blood. The warm wind lifted her silver-gold hair in a languid dance as she weighed the words that had brought her here, a continent away from the scorched fields around Meereen. Qyburn's letter had been filled with niceties, almost courtly in tone, and invited her to participate in research that could, according to him, revolutionize the face of warfare across the Seven Kingdoms. She had nearly burned the parchment the first moment she read it, her fury rising at the thought of corresponding with a disgraced ex-maester who served Cersei Lannister. Yet Tyrion's counsel and Varys's hushed urgings had stalled her hand. And so here she was, heart-thrumming with a blend of anxious curiosity and simmering mistrust, parted from her loyal advisors by layers of suspicion. The city below stretched in all directions, both captivating and terrible in its hunger. For how many centuries had rulers looked out on this very skyline, believing themselves destined to shape the realm? How many had succeeded? And how many had been devoured by it? She breathed in the salt that drifted off Blackwater Bay. Under the midday sun, the towers and battlements of King's Landing baked in a haze that shimmered with illusions of brightness and power. Cersei still sat the Iron Throne, an uneasy seat upon swords hammered and welded into a single mass of cruelty. Yet the city's gates had opened to Daenerys not with hostility but with veiled gratitude. Word of the White Walkers' defeat in the north had spread, and rumor had it that Dany had broken the Night King with her dragons and an alliance with Stark loyalists. There was a quiet sense that she was less an invader now and more of a protector. The truth, she knew, was far more complicated, with nearly every house in Westeros still harboring grievances or fears where Targaryens were concerned. Even so, Cersei's death grip on the throne had loosened just enough that she was willing to entertain the idea of a tenuous peace. And Qyburn, that puppet master of dark knowledge, had extended his hand with promises of something that could shift alliances in a heartbeat. When her thoughts turned to dragons, her heart quickened. Drogon and Regal soared beyond the horizon, distant silhouettes of lethal majesty. Their wings cast monstrous shadows across the countryside whenever they flew near. Across the narrow sea, the tales had become legend, but here in Westeros, their presence was more immediate. She had left them to hunt above the fields outside the city's walls while she ascended into the keep. Dragons had once been a sign of unstoppable power, guaranteeing Targaryen rule. Yet since the day she first walked into Khal Drogo's funeral pyre and birthed them from the ashes, she had learned how precarious that power could be. A single scorpion bolt had felled Viserion, and later, Qyburn's vile contraption had nearly killed Regal before they even reached the city. Only a miscalculation in aim saved him. Dragons were not invincible. The ex-maester's cunning devices had proven that. So why should she trust him? Qyburn approached in his soft, measured footsteps. He had been waiting for her in the corridor of twisting stone, letting her linger out in the open air before addressing him. "Your Grace," he said, offering a short bow. The sun glinted off his pale face, creases around his eyes like the lines on old parchment. His voice was careful, eminently polite, as though he addressed a queen whose favor he might yet earn. "I trust the accommodations are to your liking." She turned, letting her gaze rest on the man who was rumored to dabble in necromancy, who had resurrected the monstrosity they called Sir Robert Strong. The man who had helped Cersei hold the city against her not so long ago. "They will suffice," she said. She resisted the urge to spit the words, focusing instead on a regal calm. "Though I do not intend to linger here longer than necessary. You spoke of new possibilities for my dragons." The faint curve of Qyburn's mouth might have been satisfaction or cunning, perhaps both. "Indeed. It is a unique opportunity, Your Grace, and one that I believe will serve your ambitions in more ways than you realize." Daenerys steeled herself. There was no question that working with him felt like dancing on the edge of a blade. Cersei remained in King's Landing, theoretically still in power, but silent for the moment, as though awaiting the outcome of these clandestine talks. Some said she had retreated to a corner of the keep to brood, nursing her frustrations. Others whispered she had turned to the drink more than ever. A hush had fallen over the castle, as if the ghosts in these walls remembered the blood-soaked tragedies of Targaryen rule and recognized that history might be repeating itself. Yet, if Qyburn truly had knowledge that could protect her dragons, perhaps even strengthen them, was it not worth the risk? She walked with him through the dim corridors, past flickering torches that lined cold stone walls. In other corners of the keep, gold cloaks and Lannister guards stayed watchful, though they left her unmolested. Through half-barred windows, she spied the sprawl of the city and the occasional swirl of dust along the streets. The wind outside carried the noise of merchants hawking their wares, of thousands of footsteps, of tension roiling behind closed doors. The war had cost King's Landing dearly, as had Winter's harsh grasp, but this city had a talent for continuing on, broken but unbowed. Qyburn halted in front of a thick wooden door reinforced with iron bands. He took a torch from a sconce and passed within, leaving her to follow. The room that greeted her was ominously large, lit by scattered lanterns and the sourceless glow of hidden braziers. Rows of tables bore half-finished contraptions that reminded her of the scorpions that had killed Viserion and wounded Regal. On one side, shelves brimmed with dusty tomes and manuscripts. Closer inspection revealed what might have been small vials of glowing liquid, some hue of green that reminded her of wildfire, though it was not quite the same. And overhead, suspended in chains, hung the battered remains of a scorpion's curved bow, the metallic surface nearly sheared in half, as though scorched. Qyburn gestured at the surroundings with a subtle flourish. "This is my laboratory, or one of them, rather. Our main concern is not designing weapons to kill your dragons, my queen," he said, taking measured steps to a table in the center, "but rather to understand the mysteries of dragon physiology. That knowledge can be turned to your advantage. My research has led to certain discoveries." Daenerys stared at him, letting a brittle silence settle between them. She did not trust him, and she knew he sensed her distrust like a hound might smell meat. Discoveries. He pointed to a row of large, scaly fragments that looked suspiciously like pieces of a shed dragon scale. They were dark, blackish-green, reminiscent of Drogon's coloring but smaller. A friend of mine, well, a colleague, managed to collect these scales some time ago. In my examinations, I found anomalies, deposits of an unusual residue. Over time, I have come to believe that dragons derive their fire-breathing abilities from a combination of natural physiology and something akin to wildfire. His eyes glimmered with a quiet excitement. Over centuries, some maesters have theorized that dragons harness a destructive fluid stored in internal bladders. My research supports that notion. However, I suspect that the substance can be manipulated, improved upon. Daenerys's throat grew tight. The idea of tampering with the very essence of her children was abhorrent, conjuring images of monstrous abominations. She still remembered how quickly her trust in the warlocks of Qarth had soured when they tried to imprison her dragons for their own ends. Even so, a part of her recognized the potential here. If there was a way to bolster a dragon's resilience or fire, it would be foolish to ignore it out of hand. "And what precisely do you intend to do with that knowledge, Qyburn?" His smooth smile deepened. "Only what you command, my queen. But as a humble servant of knowledge, I merely propose that we explore how to fortify your dragons against scorpion bolts and other threats. And, if we're daring, to amplify their fire so that no city, no fortress, can stand against them. If you wish to claim the Iron Throne, or if you wish to defend all of Westeros from the next threat that emerges from the shadows, we should begin now." She forced a breath to steady her racing heart. She had witnessed enough death to know how quickly any advantage might become a curse. Yet Qyburn had touched on something important. The legacy of House Targaryen was inseparable from dragons. Over a century had passed since dragons last roamed these skies. In that time, her family lost the throne. If she was to keep her hold on power, if she was to fulfill her dream of breaking the wheel, her dragons must remain unassailable. Still, she recalled her father, the Mad King, and his obsession with wildfire, the mania that consumed him until Jaime Lannister drove a sword through his back. She had no intention of following that path. Cersei's own use of wildfire had destroyed the Great September, claiming countless lives. The memory still haunted the city's cobblestone streets. Daenerys might be capable of fearsome acts, but she did not desire to become the monster her enemies claimed she was. "I accept your invitation to learn more," she said at last. "But remember, these dragons are my children. If I suspect you intend them harm, I will end you." Qyburn bowed, his eyes shining with that strange blend of fear and elation. "Understood, Your Grace." Their uneasy alliance began, shaped by quiet hours in that secret laboratory where flaring torches cast flickering shadows across the half-finished scorpion designs and the pages of old Valyrian treatises Qyburn had dug up. Daenerys insisted that Missandei and Grey Worm be permitted to remain close, though they rarely spoke within earshot of Qyburn. Tyrion was not in King's Landing, having chosen to remain in Dragonstone to handle uncertain negotiations with the Lords of the Narrow Sea. Varys, too, seemed content to linger elsewhere. So Daenerys often found herself alone with Qyburn. She would pace near a table scattered with draconic sketches, and he would outline potential methods of enhancement, speaking in cold, clinical detail. Our approach will be incremental, he explained one evening, tapping a parchment on which he had drawn the silhouette of a dragon's digestive system, gleaned from old Targaryen journals. Your dragon's ability to produce flame is partly reliant on glands that create a volatile fluid. If we administer a specially refined compound, here he pointed to a swirl of text describing a formula of rare chemicals, we may strengthen that ability. The question, of course, is whether or not it will cause them pain. Daenerys resisted the urge to recoil. Pain. She remembered how Drogon had roared when the Sons of the Harpy stabbed him in the fighting pits, how she had nearly lost him. You said you could fortify them against scorpions as well. Is that part of the same plan? Qyburn nodded. Yes, I believe that repeated exposure to certain mineral baths and alchemical fumes could serve to harden their scales. Dragons do shed older scales over time. We could provoke the growth of new scales that are thicker, more resistant. In theory, Daenerys repeated, letting the words echo. Over the coming days, she arranged for Drogon and Rhaegal to take up roost outside the city walls in a wide plain once used as farmland. The tents belonging to her loyal, unsullied ringed the perimeter. No longer was she an invading force laying siege, but neither was she a captive. The tension in King's Landing hovered like a drawn bowstring, though no one openly challenged her presence. She supposed that was the Lannister queen's tactic, to wait, to learn, to see if Daenerys would once again threaten to raze the city. But Daenerys had come for something else this time, Qyburn's knowledge, and that uneasy pause stretched day by day. The first real test of Qyburn's alchemical manipulations arrived when he asked Daenerys to let Drogon ingest a small quantity of a fluid he had concocted. Qyburn had brewed it in an iron pot, swirling in colors that reminded Daenerys of shimmering snake scales. Its smell was pungent, making her eyes water. The theory, Qyburn said, was that a measured dose would amplify Drogon's fire. When she demanded to see the results of a lesser test first, Qyburn demonstrated on a captured lizard. The poor thing hissed before exhaling a ribbon of flame so unnaturally bright that Daenerys gasped. The lizard died soon after, body scorched from within. Your dragons are far more robust, Qyburn assured her, though even he looked unsettled by the demonstration. They have a unique biological capacity for generating and surviving their own flames. This lizard, well, it was merely a lesser stand-in. If you prefer, I can find something else closer to a draconic species, but such creatures are exceedingly rare. Daenerys felt her stomach knot. The memory of the small lizard's death lingered. But if this was the cost of ensuring her children survived the perils of scorpion bolts, ballista, or other contraptions of war, could she refuse? Every time she saw the empty space where Viserion once soared, she remembered that the White Walkers had turned him against her and that Qyburn's scorpion had proven lethal. Dragons were not guaranteed safety. We will begin with the smallest possible dose, she said, her voice quiet but resolved. And if Drogon shows any sign of distress, I will end this experiment immediately. Qyburn agreed. The next day, Daenerys arrived at dawn, accompanied by Grey Worm and a handful of Unsullied as a precaution. Drogon loomed nearby, his shadow colossal, reptilian eyes narrowed at the figures below. He trusted Daenerys, but the presence of strangers made him restless. She approached her dragon, placing a hand against the pebbled scales of his flank. Easy, my love, she whispered. I will not let them harm you. Qyburn stood a few steps behind, carrying the small black vial. The men who accompanied him kept their distance, arms trembling at the sight of the great beast. Daenerys took the vial and stared at the swirl of liquid. It smelled even stronger than before, like rotted vegetation and brimstone. Reluctantly, she stepped to Drogon's side and coaxed his attention. The dragon's snout descended, nostrils flaring. Daenerys spoke in a hushed tone, familiar from times she had fed and tended to him since he was barely the size of a cat. Drogon opened his jaws, revealing rows of teeth that could shear a man in half. In one swift motion, Daenerys flicked the vial's contents toward the back of his throat. Drogon closed his jaws, reared his head back, and let out a deep rumble that made the ground vibrate. She held her breath. For a moment, Drogon's pupils dilated, his body tensed. She felt the threat of panic creeping in, but she forced herself to remain calm, stroking his neck and murmuring a lullaby she had once learned among the Dothraki. Her heart pounded. Had she poisoned him? Then Drogon's muscles relaxed. His breathing steadied. He gazed down at Daenerys with what she imagined was confusion, but not pain. A wave of relief washed over her. Qyburn stepped forward, eyes alight with curiosity. If the formula works, we should see a difference in the intensity of his fire. Would you be so kind as to test it, Your Grace? Daenerys guided Drogon a short distance away from the tents, ensuring there was enough space to avoid accidental incineration. She felt the dragon's tension under her hand as though he sensed something new simmering within. Gently, she encouraged him to breathe fire on a distant boulder. The gout of flame that erupted from Drogon's mouth thundered so loud Daenerys flinched. The fire burned white-hot in the center, with tongues of iridescent color swirling at the edges. The boulder erupted into molten fragments before disintegrating entirely, leaving nothing behind but swirling ash and glowing rock. Even Drogon, accustomed to unleashing his flames, let out a startled cry. He craned his neck as if in shock at what he had just done. Daenerys stared at the smoldering ruin, her heart hammered with awe and fear. Qyburn's formula had magnified Drogon's destructive power to a level she had never seen. Drogon's chest rose and fell with excited breaths, the heat radiating from him enough to make her sweat. She laid a reassuring hand on his side, checking for any tremors or signs of internal pain. He seemed alert, even energized. Qyburn's face bore a look that was part triumph, part eerie fascination. "Remarkable," he whispered. "With more refined dosages, we might sustain this effect for longer durations and perhaps replicate it with your other dragons." Daenerys' stomach churned with possibilities. One part of her roared with exultation, imagine the foe who would dare stand against them now. Another part cringed at the realization that such power was dangerous in ways she could barely control. She remembered the moment she had stood outside the walls of King's Landing, her rage boiling, her dragon unleashed, and how she had almost committed an atrocity. Adding more destructive power to her children might lead her down a darker path. Still, if Cersei's scorpions or any new contraption threatened them, such strength could be the difference between life and death. And if war rose again, it might end quickly under a hail of unstoppable dragon fire. Over the following weeks, Daenerys and Qyburn toiled in secret, testing incremental changes to the formula. They discovered that Rhaegal responded similarly to the mixture, though he often displayed more skittishness beforehand. Neither dragon seemed harmed, no roars of agony, no signs of the flesh warping from within. Yet both were visibly more aggressive after ingesting the compound. Their roars reverberated across the plains, and they devoured livestock with feverish appetite, as if their new capacity for flame demanded higher nourishment. Daenerys ensured they were well-fed, bringing in flocks of sheep and goats from the surrounding areas. Occasionally, the local shepherds would watch in terror, though her men compensated them with gold whenever possible. Still, fear was the currency that kept King's Landing in line. Fear of the dragons, fear of the Targaryen queen who controlled them. The Hardened Scales project proved more challenging. Qyburn constructed large, steaming baths in the bowels of the keep, using a complicated network of heated pipes. He claimed soaking the dragons in certain solutions, derived from volcanic minerals, distillations of wildfire residue, and other secret alchemical ingredients, might trigger a beneficial shedding and regrowth of scales. But persuading Drogon and Rhaegal to enter those baths was no easy feat. It required hours of gentle coaxing from Daenerys, who waded knee-deep in the brackish water, speaking soothingly. Drogon often hissed at the acrid fumes rising from the water's surface, and Rhaegal sniffed it skeptically. In the end, Daenerys managed to guide them inside for several minutes at a time. Qyburn measured the results: scale density, thickness, even the reflective quality. Over time, he predicted, the dragons would grow a new layer of scales more resistant to penetration by bolts. It might take months, perhaps longer. Amid these uncertain experiments, Daenerys gradually began to sense something shifting in the atmosphere of King's Landing. The common folk, many who once viewed her with dread, now watched her pass through the streets with cautious awe. They saw her feeding the dragons, felt the gusts of wind from their beating wings. Rumors spread of how she sought to create unstoppable beasts of legend. Some feared her even more now. Others whispered that she might indeed be the savior who would keep them safe from future threats, from the repeated madness of kings and queens who had ravaged the city time after time. Daenerys felt that same tension within herself, balancing the line between conqueror and protector. She had never stopped desiring the throne, for it represented the culmination of her family's legacy, the end of a war that had lasted her entire life. Yet she had also seen how the crown could corrupt. Sometimes she found herself walking alone through the keep's dark corridors, remembering the stories of her father. Aerys Targaryen had once locked himself away, delving into cruel experiments with wildfire, believing it would secure his rule. She saw parallels now in her own secret alliance with Qyburn. Had her father's intentions also begun as a desire to protect his bloodline? The thought unsettled her, but she had not come this far to shy away from what might save her dragons. She had lost enough, she told herself. She would not lose Drogon and Rhaegal. Qyburn's successes emboldened him, and he began drafting new proposals. On certain nights, he would share them with Daenerys beneath the flickering lantern light, carefully unrolling parchments. He spoke of advanced breeding programs, of ways to manipulate a dragon's size or growth rate, of potentially accelerating the healing of their wings. Daenerys listened but remained guarded. She did not want to meddle too deeply, to create unnatural abominations, or to cross a line that might cause her dragons indescribable agony. Yet the lure of ensuring her dynasty endured could not be dismissed. What if she could breed more dragons, enough to guarantee no alliance or rebellion would ever threaten her line again? As she weighed such possibilities, the political landscape continued to swirl. Cersei stayed out of sight most days, rumored to be ill or simply unwilling to face her one-time foe who now roamed the halls of her seat of power. Jaime Lannister had not been seen in King's Landing for some time. Some said he had vanished after the war in the north, never to return. The lords of the Crownlands were wary, uncertain if they should declare for the Targaryen queen outright or wait to see if she fully claimed the Iron Throne. The City Watch, meanwhile, followed an unspoken policy of letting Daenerys' unsullied stand guard where they would, so long as no violence erupted in the streets. Then one morning, the hush broke. A raven arrived bearing a message for Daenerys. Jon Snow, king in the north, though he never seemed to embrace the title, had traveled south again, seeking an audience with her. The reason was unclear, only that it was urgent. Daenerys felt her heart stutter in her chest at the thought of seeing him once more. They had parted on uncertain terms after the war against the White Walkers. The cost in lives had been high, including many close to Jon. Yet they had triumphed together. She had believed the bond might unite them in ruling, but afterwards disagreements surfaced on how best to proceed. Jon, so honest and straightforward, had expressed discomfort at the idea of unleashing dragons on those who refused to bend the knee. Daenerys, for her part, could not forget how her father's madness had overshadowed everything in the minds of northern lords. Their alliance was uneasy, yet she respected him in a way she had rarely respected anyone. Perhaps this visit might mend the rift or break it further. Jon arrived at the gates to the city with a modest retinue of Northmen carrying the Stark banner alongside the Targaryen one. He looked weary, the ghosts of war etched in the faint lines of his face. Dark hair curled around his shoulders, and he wore sturdy traveling leathers. When he came before Daenerys in the throne room, where the Iron Throne loomed behind her, unoccupied still, he greeted her with a nod that spoke of familiarity rather than subservience. "Your Grace," he said, voice echoing across the vaulted chamber. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." She inclined her head, noticing the flicker of sadness in his eyes. She guessed he had grieved for those lost in the war far more than she had realized. "Jon, you are always welcome here, though I sense there is more to your visit than politeness. What news from the north?" He swallowed, letting a brief pause hang between them. "Winter has receded for now, but the scars remain. Many lords question whether we should hold ourselves apart once again, as the north has for generations. Some fear that war will find them no matter what alliances are made. They've heard rumors, Daenerys. Rumors that you're working with Qyburn, that you're enhancing your dragons in ways that could prove devastating. And that concerns the north." "It concerns me." Her posture stiffened. "Yes, I am working with Qyburn. My dragons have been vulnerable. I refuse to let another one die. Is that truly so alarming?" His gaze was searching, quietly agonized, as if he hated being the bearer of such tidings. "If you make them unstoppable, some fear you will conquer them against their will. They remember the Targaryens of old. They remember dragonfire scorching rebels and innocents alike. They know your father tried to burn the city with wildfire. This new alignment with Qyburn reminds them of that madness." Her hands curled into fists. She felt a flare of indignation. Had her every action doomed her to the same condemnation as her father? "I am not my father," she said through clenched teeth. "And Qyburn's knowledge is nothing like Aerys' mania." Jon's eyes searched hers. "Do you truly believe that? Qyburn served Cersei. He built the weapons that killed Viserion. He used monstrous experiments to create Ser Robert Strong. Why trust him now?" She stood tall, determined not to waver. Because I cannot allow ignorance to claim my dragons the way ignorance once claimed House Targaryen. If there is knowledge that can protect Drogon and Regal, I will not let it slip through my fingers." Jon lowered his voice, stepping closer. "And what if that knowledge corrupts you, as the pursuit of power has corrupted so many? What if your dragons become something unnatural, something uncontrollable? Or if the people of the realm see your unstoppable beasts and decide they must rise against you before you become a tyrant? Your father's legacy casts a deep shadow." Daenerys, her throat constricted. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, felt the weight of his concern. But she also felt the sharpened edge of her own determination. She would not be undone by fear of what could be. "Then I will tread carefully," she said. "But I will not abandon this. I have come too far." The corner of Jon's mouth tightened, and he bowed his head. "Then so be it. I came to warn you of the unrest in the north, and to ask you to reconsider. But I see your resolve is firm. I hope you will remember that not all threats can be overcome by greater fire." Daenerys. That night, she could not sleep. Memories swirled in her mind. The day she stepped out of the pyre with 3 newborn dragons clinging to her skin. The shrieks of the enslaved masses in Meereen as she fought for their freedom. The roar of Viserion's death. Her father's voice, the Mad King, was but an echo in stories told by others, but it seemed to echo louder now. Perhaps, she mused, the difference between conquest and tyranny was measured in a hair's breadth. Yet morning arrived, and her convictions still burned bright. She had told Jon the truth. She would not abandon the chance to protect her children. Some weeks later, the next stage of Qyburn's plan unfurled. He called it a reinforced draconic harness. Though Daenerys thought that too mundane a phrase for what it truly was, he had crafted elaborate, carefully measured segments of thin metal plating shaped to fit along a dragon's neck, shoulders, and chest, areas known to be more vulnerable to penetrating bolts. The harness was meant to be lightweight enough not to impede flight, but sturdy enough to disperse the impact of a scorpion or ballista shot. Adding to that, Qyburn had layered the plates with an alchemical lining rumored to deflect even the sharpest steel. If it worked, it would be like giving the dragons armor without restricting their movement entirely. Daenerys stood in the courtyard at dawn, assisting a handful of Unsullied in fitting the harness onto Drogon. The massive black dragon hissed warily as they maneuvered around him, buckling the straps in place. He flicked his tail, sending 2 men stumbling. She soothed him with a calm voice, pressing her palm to his flank. The harness clung to Drogon's scaly hide, shining darkly in the morning light. She had to admit it was impressive craftsmanship. Qyburn hovered on the sidelines, scribbling notes. At last, the harness was secure, hugging the curvature of Drogon's neck and chest. Daenerys called for the Unsullied to stand clear, then climbed atop her dragon's back, sliding into the saddle which was affixed atop the new plating. "Dracarys," she breathed. Drogon let out a rattling roar and launched himself skyward, wings beating thunderously. The weight of the harness was evident in how he ascended, but after a few beats he seemed to adjust, leveling out high above the Red Keep. Daenerys felt a surge of exhilaration. They circled the city once, the harness rattling slightly but staying firmly in place. Once she was confident in Drogon's comfort, she directed him to land near a target field outside the city walls. There, waiting, was a scorpion contraption half hidden behind a wooden barricade. One of Qyburn's assistants prepared to fire a blunted bolt meant to simulate a real attack. Daenerys' heart hammered with uncertainty. She had not yet fully convinced herself that this test was wise. But if the harness and the new scale growth truly provided protection, this was the only way to find out. She gave the signal. The scorpion let loose the bolt and it whistled through the air straight toward Drogon's chest. He snarled, tensing in anticipation. The impact reverberated with a metal clang and slid off to the side, leaving only a shallow scrape on one of his thicker scales. Drogon let out a roar of challenge, flaring his wings. Daenerys felt relief flood her. It seemed to work. Qyburn observed from a distance, nodding. "As you see, Your Grace," he called, "the harness and the alchemical treatments significantly reduce harm. With repeated use, we can refine the design further." Daenerys patted Drogon's neck. The impact had been jarring, but clearly it had not caused significant injury. It felt like victory, a triumph of knowledge over fear. But as she gazed across the field, she noticed a small group of onlookers. They were townsfolk, laborers, perhaps petty merchants. Their faces showed more terror than awe at the display. She realized how she must appear, a queen aloft, a dragon outfitted with armor, forging unstoppable might. Were they thinking of her father's madness? Or Cersei's cruelty? Or some new horror that might descend upon them? Stepping down from Drogon, she let herself breathe. She had chosen this path. She told herself it was to protect her children, to defend the realm. Yet the realm did not see the nuance. They only saw potential devastation. Jon's warning stirred in her mind. Was there a line she was beginning to cross? Qyburn approached carefully. We can proceed with Rhaegal's harness next, my queen. After all, equal protection is wise. And if we continue refining the new scale growth process, both dragons will soon be unstoppable in the sky. She nodded slowly, the corners of her mouth pulled taut. Yes. Proceed. She glanced at Drogon, who hissed softly as though sensing her mood. Then, with a heavy heart, she began to walk back toward the city, leaving Qyburn to coordinate the removal of the harness and the next steps for Rhaegal. As she strode, she sensed the eyes of the small folk on her. Some looked at her with reverence, some with fear. None dared approach. In the following days, strange rumors spread more rapidly than Daenerys could contain them. Some whispered of a monstrous experiment in the depths of the keep, that Daenerys was forging dragons with impenetrable hides and flames that could melt entire castles in an instant. Others speculated that the queen had gone mad, that she would burn King's Landing at a whim if they displeased her. The city guards, half disloyal to the absent Cersei, whispered behind closed doors. The mood was uneasy, reminiscent of those days after Cersei blew up the Great September. No one knew if they were living under the rule of a benevolent protector or a new tyrant in the making. In the midst of this, Jon Snow stayed in King's Landing, conferring with Daenerys on ways to calm the realm. He argued that she must show restraint, that she should dismantle or at least reveal the nature of Qyburn's experiments to prove she was not creating horrors behind the scenes. She countered that secrecy was necessary to protect the knowledge from those who would use it against her. He insisted that the fear she was stoking would lead to greater unrest, perhaps even another rebellion. She bristled at the idea, but she recognized the validity of his point. And yet, how could she let go of an advantage that might one day save her dragons from a future threat? It was during one of these heated discussions in a dim corridor that a cold voice interrupted them. Cersei Lannister emerged from the shadows, flanked by the silent hulk of Ser Robert Strong and a pair of gold cloaks. She was thinner than Daenerys remembered, as if bitterness had gnawed her from within, but her eyes blazed with the same cunning. Daenerys and Jon immediately stiffened, Grey Worm stepping forward in defense. Relax, Cersei purred, a hint of sarcasm in her tone. I am not here to fight. If I wanted to fight, I'd have brought more men. Daenerys regarded her warily. I was told you were keeping to yourself. Cersei's lips curled in a faint smirk. Indeed, I have. But rumors find their way to me regardless. Our dear Qyburn is quite resourceful. It seems, Targaryen, that you're forging beasts more terrifying than even your father's wildest fantasies. Her gaze slid to Jon. And you, the Stark's rightful heir, see the danger. You've tried to dissuade her. But she won't listen, will she? Jon clenched his jaw. I'm not here to counsel you, Cersei. She dismissed him with a wave of her hand. Then she focused on Daenerys. I suppose, dear sister queen, that you understand the precariousness of your position. Amplified or not, those dragons are the only reason you stand here. I'd be mindful of how far you push the people. The scorpions I once had stationed around King's Landing, there could be more. Or new weapons, if you give them cause to fear you. Daenerys wanted to retort, but something about Cersei's expression halted her. A wave of loathing swept through her, recalling the pain and bloodshed that woman had caused. Yet in that moment, she recognized a certain truth in Cersei's words. Fear was a double-edged sword, as apt to incite rebellion as it was to secure obedience. She had told herself she would break the wheel, free the common folk from tyrants. Yet was she not stepping into the role of a tyrant if she continued down this path? After a tense silence, Cersei inclined her head, mocking. I've said my piece. Continue your experiments if you wish. Care not. The throne is a burden I gladly let you inherit, if you can keep it. But do not forget how quickly the tide can turn against you. She pivoted on her heels and walked away, Ser Robert Strong lumbering behind. Jon exhaled, raking a hand through his dark hair. Do you see? Even Cersei, twisted as she is, knows the danger in this. The people are frightened. If you don't handle this carefully, enough. Daenerys snapped, turning away. She was tired of feeling cornered by cautionary speeches. I will handle it as I see fit. Jon's voice softened. Daenerys, I fear you're drifting toward a place you might not come back from. Her throat tightened. She couldn't bear the pity or the sorrow in his gaze. So she stepped forward, leaving him behind in the corridor. She knew he was right in some measure, but she refused to let that knowledge paralyze her. This was what ruling demanded. Hard choices, sacrifices. She would not let her dragons be vulnerable again. In the depths of the keep, Qyburn was waiting. He seemed excited, frantic almost. When she entered his laboratory, he gestured for her to come closer. On a table lay a small chunk of what looked like dragon scale, flecked with a strange shimmering hue. A network of veins ran through it like living crystal. I have discovered something extraordinary, he said, a quiver in his voice. The new scales growing on Drogon and Regal contain properties akin to the forging potential of Valyrian steel. Daenerys blinked. Valyrian steel? She thought of the blades that had proved so critical in slaying White Walkers. A steel of legend, sharper, stronger, lighter. What does that mean for the dragons? Qyburn's eyes danced with possibilities. Their scales could become nearly impervious to standard weaponry. Not just scorpions, but swords, arrows, anything short of an equally rare forging. And that's not all. I found residual wildfire-like energy entwined in the molecular composition. If I may use an imprecise term, in essence it resonates with an alchemical signature. The dragons might, in time, become living catalysts. Their flame could approach or surpass the potency of wildfire itself. I suspect even stone walls would crumble at their breath. They would be unstoppable, my queen. Daenerys's breath caught in her throat. Unstoppable. The word hung there like a bright, dangerous promise. No one would dare threaten her dragons again. She would be free to rule, to enact her vision of a just realm. She pictured the noble houses kneeling, unable to wage war, forced to accept peace. Perhaps that was the way to break the cycle of endless conflict. Overwhelm them so fully they dared not raise arms. Then the realm would finally know peace. Yet an echo of Jon's voice lingered in her mind. What if that power corrupts you? She swallowed hard, voice trembling with the weight of it. What must we do to see this through? Qyburn leaned in, lowering his voice. We would need to continue the baths, possibly for months more. The chemical treatments must be carefully balanced. Any miscalculation could result in the dragon's vital organs being strained. But if we succeed, your dragons will be as unstoppable as Balerion the Black Dread was rumored to be in the days of Aegon's conquest. She closed her eyes, imagining how that conquest had forged the 7 kingdoms under Targaryen rule. In the stories, Aegon soared upon Balerion, destroying armies and fortresses with ease, forging an empire in fire and blood. It seemed Daenerys was on the cusp of forging something similar or more terrifying. Her soul quivered at the thought. Should she do it? The realm was wounded, in desperate need of unity. She had the power to force that unity. Yet the cruelty that accompanied such force weighed on her conscience. Still, she could not bear the thought of losing her dragons to cunning enemies. And she was not alone in the world. People depended on her, believed in her. Did she not owe them security, even if it meant walking this razor's edge? So she said yes. She gave Qyburn permission to proceed. Over the next weeks, her days fell into a relentless routine. She would oversee the reapplication of that shimmering fluid, ensuring Drogon and Regal ingested controlled doses that heightened their flame. She would help coax them into the specially prepared baths, monitoring them for any sign of pain or distress. She would watch as Qyburn meticulously examined shed scales and tested them for the new properties. Slowly, the dragon's scales indeed took on a deeper, more metallic sheen. Their roars boomed with greater resonance, their breath scorching the very air. But Daenerys also noticed they grew more restless, prowling the outskirts of the city, snapping at one another. She worried the changes might be stoking their aggression. When she flew atop Drogon, she could feel his muscles quiver as though charged with latent fury. During the time, Jon attempted to speak with her repeatedly. Sometimes she listened, sometimes she turned him away. When they did speak, the argument always circled back to the same question: when is enough enough? She found no easy answer, so she avoided one altogether. I do this for them, she insisted. They are my children. I won't let them be taken from me. I won't let the realm tear them down like it did the dragons of old. Jon would press, what happens when your unstoppable dragons are seen as a bigger threat than any you sought to defeat? What happens when men who fear you decide they must strike first? Her only reply was a stony silence. She did not want to imagine that future. She wanted to believe that if her dragons were invincible, war would become obsolete, for who would challenge her? But deep inside, she recalled how the presence of dragons did not always prevent rebellions. Men like Robert Baratheon had toppled a Targaryen dynasty that still possessed dragons, though weaker than before. The difference now was that her dragons would not be weak. She pushed away the uneasy stirrings in her heart. Then, one fateful evening, Qyburn requested her presence with more urgency than usual. She arrived in the subterranean chamber where the baths were maintained, the torchlight reflecting off the waters that shimmered with unnatural hue. The acrid smell was familiar by now. Drogon and Rhaegal lay near the far end, heads resting on the damp stone floor, eyes half-lidded. A wave of alarm hit Daenerys as she rushed over. Normally, they were alert, even restless, but now they were eerily still. "What happened?" she demanded, voice echoing off the wet walls. Qyburn pressed a cloth to his brow, sweat dripping down his face. "They've seemed lethargic all day. Perhaps the new solution I introduced was too potent. I'm working on a countermeasure, but I've never seen them so, Daenerys approached Drogon, her heart thudding like a drum in her chest. She placed a hand on his neck. His scales were hot, far hotter than usual. His breathing was slow, labored. The great reptilian eye rolled toward her, but there was a sluggishness that cut her to the core. "Drogon," she whispered. "My love, stay with me." Rhaegal let out a low, uneasy groan, shifting his wings as though trying to stand but too weary. Daenerys rounded on Qyburn, fury in her eyes. "You told me this was safe." He held up his hands in a mixture of alarm and apology. "I made a miscalculation, my queen, but I'm certain I can correct it. Just please allow me to administer an antidote of sorts. If the formula remains within them, it might cause further strain on their hearts." She stepped aside only because she had no alternative. Qyburn scrambled to retrieve a series of vials and syringes, his hands trembling as he measured out fluids and muttered about proportions. Daenerys hovered near Drogon's head, cradling it gently, tears burning in her eyes. She had sworn she would never let her dragons come to harm again. And here they were, drowning in some chemical brew meant to strengthen them. She wanted to rage at Qyburn, to unleash her fury, but she forced herself to keep still. She needed him to fix this. For several hours, the chamber was consumed by frantic work. Qyburn and his assistants carefully injected both dragons with a counter-solution while Daenerys murmured soft prayers to the Dothraki gods, to the old Valyrian deities, to anything that might listen. Drogon's breathing became even more ragged at one point, and she felt terror grip her heart so tightly she could hardly breathe. Then, little by little, the dragon's respiration eased. They stirred, lifting their heads with visible effort. Drogon let out a weak rumble as if to reassure her he still lived. Rhaegal blinked slowly, the color returning to his gaze. Daenerys exhaled a shaky breath. Relief and guilt warred within her. She stroked Drogon's muzzle, tears sliding down her cheeks. The dragons were alive, but she could not escape the certainty that she had gone too far, pushed them beyond safe limits. Qyburn, slumped against a table, sighed with relief of his own. He wiped sweat from his brow, avoiding her gaze. She rose, her expression dark. "Enough, Qyburn. No more formulae or harnesses or scale treatments. I'm calling it off." His eyes widened. "Your Grace, the transformations are almost complete. With just a bit more." She advanced on him, and for a moment, the fury of her lineage shone in her eyes. "They nearly died," she hissed. "I will not risk them again. Do not test my patience." He inclined his head, lips pressed thin. "Of course. Your Grace's command is final." But there was a flicker of something in his face, frustration, or perhaps the hunger of a man who felt he had touched the edge of a great discovery. She turned away, beckoning Grey Worm to keep watch. As she moved to comfort her dragons, she did not see Qyburn's cold stare in the torchlight, nor hear the faint mutter of regrets under his breath. In the days that followed, Drogon and Rhaegal recovered slowly. Daenerys fed them, spent hours by their side. Even Jon sat with her at times, voicing quiet sympathy. He did not say, "I told you so," but his eyes spoke volumes. She felt gratitude for his compassion mixed with embarrassment at her own folly. How close had she come to losing them again? The memory would not leave her. Neither would the guilt of ignoring her own moral misgivings. Qyburn retreated into his laboratory, outwardly obeying Daenerys' orders to halt further experiments. But she could sense the tension in him, the dissatisfaction at being cut off from his grand designs. Meanwhile, the realm's apprehension continued to mount. Whispers circulated that the Targaryen queen was forging super dragons to burn the 7 kingdoms if they did not kneel. Others said she had already turned her dragons into abominations, that it was only a matter of time before they unleashed their mutated fire on innocents. Daenerys heard pleas from small folk who begged her not to destroy their homes, from lords who demanded transparency, from those who spoke of new alliances forming in the shadows. Jon quietly told her that the North might withdraw support entirely, for they believed she was on the path to tyranny. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. This was not the peace she had envisioned. One afternoon, she flew Drogon, still wearing his partial harness, for a short patrol around the city, ensuring that the scorpions from the previous war had been fully dismantled. She did not intend to terrorize the citizens, but the sight of a dragon in the sky often induced panic. Looking down, she saw the terrified faces, the scattered flocks of people diving for cover. A hollow feeling gnawed at her. She had wanted them to love her. Instead, they cowered in fear. When she landed again in the courtyard, she found Qyburn waiting for her, accompanied by Cersei Lannister of all people. Grey Worm and the Unsullied tensed, forming a protective arc around Daenerys as she dismounted. Drogon growled, unsettled by Cersei's presence. The Lannister queen parted from Qyburn's side, strolling forward in her regal garb, eyes flicking over Drogon's harness. Daenerys approached, posture rigid. "What is this?" Cersei's lips twitched. "A final negotiation, if you will. This city belongs to me by rights of conquest and inheritance. Yet you have lingered here, overshadowing me, overshadowing the throne, that you have not yet claimed it by official ceremony." Daenerys forced a neutral expression. "You've made no attempt to push me out. Is your stance changing?" Cersei shrugged. "That depends on you. The people of King's Landing are on edge. They fear another Targaryen purge of fire. I hear rumors of betrayal in the north, rumors that the Riverlands might stand against you. Your alliance is faltering, Targaryen. But does it have to?" Daenerys narrowed her eyes. "Speak plainly." Cersei folded her arms, glancing at Drogon, who fixed her with a baleful stare. "I'm sure my dear Qyburn has told you about the unstoppable dragons you've nearly created. Now you see the cost of that experiment. And I imagine you see how the realm reacts when they think you're building a doomsday weapon. If you want to unify Westeros, it cannot be through sheer terror. You need acceptance, or at least acquiescence. I'm prepared to step aside to let you officially claim the throne and relegate me to a lesser status so long as certain terms are met." Daenerys' heart thumped warily. "And those terms?" Cersei's eyes glittered. "A guarantee of my personal safety and estate in the Crownlands, let's say Casterly Rock, if you wish to keep me distant from the capital. And the dismantling of these enhancements to your dragons. Publicly, so all know you do not plan to incinerate them." Daenerys' mind raced. Part of her longed to simply banish Cersei or have her executed for the crimes she committed. But she was tired of the endless cycle of conflict, and she could see how letting Cersei live might be a strategic choice, quelling the fears of the realm. Yet the second demand, publicly dismantling the enhancements to her dragons, sent a spike of alarm through her. She had already decided to halt new experiments, but a public dismantling might require removing what had already been done. She thought of the newly grown scales, the harness, the defensive plating, the heightened fire. Some changes were not easily undone, and Qyburn's presence, encouraging further secrecy, weighed on her. But if she refused Cersei's terms, the city might spiral into chaos once more, with pockets of rebellion igniting across Westeros. Jon, who had arrived behind her with Grey Worm, spoke up. "Daenerys, you don't need to make this decision now. There are other ways to assure the realm you won't burn them." Cersei's gaze flicked to Jon. "Oh, but you do need to decide. The lords are uneasy. The city is uneasy. Tension crackles in the streets. If you do not publicly demonstrate your peaceful intentions, I suspect you'll find yourself facing more foes than allies before long. Perhaps I can't defeat your dragons, but others might contrive ways. One can only imagine how Qyburn's knowledge of your dragons might be turned against you by the next cunning mind he partners with." Qyburn stood silent, avoiding both women's gazes. Daenerys felt a cold chill snake through her. She knew this conversation was a power play by Cersei, but it was also a reflection of the real fear saturating the realm. She had thought unstoppable dragons would secure her rule, but they had only inflamed paranoia. For a moment, she saw clearly that forging dragons beyond nature's intent was not the solution. Perhaps the only solution was forging alliances, forging trust. She closed her eyes, recalling Drogon's labored breaths in the bath, recalling the terror she had felt. Enough, she thought. She would not sacrifice her dragon's well-being or the realm's peace to chase a dream of absolute security. When she opened her eyes, she spoke with a quiet resolve. "Very well. I accept your terms regarding your safety, but as for the dismantling of these enhancements, she paused, thinking of how some changes were irreversible. I will publicly announce that I have ended all alchemical modifications to my dragons, that I will not seek to increase their power beyond what they already possess. Any harnesses or devices we have made will be decommissioned. The realm will see that I intend to protect my dragons, not weaponize them further. Cersei's gaze narrowed. And you will proclaim me free to depart to Casterly Rock once you're crowned? Yes, Daenerys said. If that is the price of peace, I'll pay it. A slender smile curved on Cersei's lips. A wise choice. Then I shall depart soon enough. I tire of the city. She cast a look at Qyburn, who lowered his gaze, then turned away. In the days that followed, Daenerys proclaimed to the city that she had forsaken further experimentation on her dragons. She oversaw the careful removal and dismantling of scorpion designs stored in Qyburn's laboratory, as well as the half-finished harness segments intended to strengthen their hides. In a formal address given in the courtyard of the Red Keep, she declared her intentions to reign with justice, not fear. The common folk, gathered at a distance, watched warily. But some relief showed on their faces, as if a dark cloud was beginning to lift. Qyburn stood at the fringes of the gathering, his expression carefully hidden. Daenerys did not banish him outright. He was still a man of knowledge, and she believed he could be useful in other ways. But she no longer trusted him anywhere near her dragons. She assigned Grey Worm to keep him under close watch, ensuring no further experiments took place in secret. Jon took in her speech with quiet approval, standing among her retinue. When the crowd began to disperse, he approached. It was the right choice, he said softly. She turned to him, her heart heavy with a mixture of regret and resolve. I nearly lost Drogon and Rhaegal, and I nearly lost myself in pursuit of a power no one should wield. She let her gaze drift to the sky, where Drogon soared, free of harnesses, scales gleaming in the sun. Rhaegal circled nearby, a proud silhouette. They were still formidable, still dragons. Jon, she said, her voice trembling with relief she had not expected, perhaps the realm can learn to trust me yet. He looked at her with that measured, thoughtful expression. Give them time. And while they watch you, let them see a queen who fights for them, not against them. She nodded, exhaling a breath she had been holding for too long. The end of Qyburn's enhancements did not mean her dragons were suddenly weak. They remained fierce, and some of the changes were irreversible. Their scales had indeed grown stronger, their fire more potent. But Daenerys would no longer push them farther, no longer risk twisting them into unnatural terrors. She could live with having strong dragons that were still dragons rather than monstrous engines of war. If anyone sought to harm her children, they would find them plenty formidable, but she would not force them to bear the scars of unnatural manipulations. In the weeks that followed, Cersei made good on her agreement. She departed for Casterly Rock with a modest retinue, leaving the Red Keep's rule to Daenerys by default. The city's mood remained wary, but Daenerys' refusal to publicly continue the dragon enhancements began to calm fears. Lords who had hovered in indecision started to come forward, offering fealty or at least cautious cooperation. The North, through Jon Snow, reasserted its alliance, stipulating that the crown respect northern customs and autonomy. Daenerys agreed. She had learned enough about uniting the realm to know that compromise was necessary to avoid endless rebellion. From time to time, Daenerys felt a pang of what might have been. She could have commanded unstoppable dragons, become a queen no one dared cross. But the cost, she realized, would have been too high for her soul and for the realm. Standing on a balcony overlooking the city, she watched the sunlight dance on the rooftops, and she heard the faint cries of merchants in the markets below. She felt the warm breeze lifting her hair, reminding her that life continued, that it was delicate and easily destroyed by the fires of unchecked ambition. She was a Targaryen, the blood of the dragon, but she chose not to unleash that blood in madness. The day of her coronation arrived at last. The Iron Throne, a mass of swords hammered together in the centuries past, awaited her in the throne room. The hall was crowded with onlookers, lords, ladies, knights, common folk who had managed to gain entry. Outside, across the city, the bells rang. Daenerys entered wearing a simple yet elegant gown, flanked by her most trusted advisors and guarded by the Unsullied. Drogon and Rhaegal roared overhead, their cries echoing through the city's spires. Some looked fearful, others cheered. She advanced to the throne, where the High Septon of this newly reformed faith stood ready. Jon Snow stood off to the side, arms folded, a subtle nod of encouragement on his face. She knelt on the dais, and the High Septon performed the ancient rites. The crowd was hushed but not silent. Daenerys sensed their collective breath, their hopes and anxieties, their distrust and their yearning. As the metallic crown touched her head, a wave of memory and dream cascaded through her mind. The red waste where she had wandered with Khal Drogo's Khalasar, the seas of grass beyond V's Duthrak, the bloody fight in the fighting pits of Meereen, the endless battles for freedom and survival, the birth of her dragons in flame. She rose, crowned queen of the Undulls and the First Men, protector of the realm, and perhaps a new beginning for House Targaryen. In her first royal decree, she announced a general pardon for those who had fought against her, provided they swear loyalty to the crown and forsake further rebellion. She promised reforms aimed at rebuilding the war-ravaged lands, especially those near the capital. She established new protections for the small folk, aiming to prevent abuses of power by local lords. And she reaffirmed her vow. Her dragons would stand as guardians of the realm, not instruments of its subjugation. Over time, the words would prove whether they rang true or hollow. Weeks later, as she walked along the battlements of the Red Keep, she found Jon Snow leaning against the stone, gazing over Blackwater Bay. The city stretched out before them, an endless tapestry of roofs and winding streets. Drogon and Rhaegal glided above, their shadows crossing the water. She joined him, resting her hands on the cool stone. He glanced at her. "You've come a long way to sit here in peace." She nodded, lips curving into a faint smile. "So have you." They let a comfortable silence settle. At length, Daenerys spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "The realm is fragile. My father broke trust. Cersei twisted it. I nearly lost it to my own ambition. Perhaps we can mend it one piece at a time." Jon nodded. "And if another threat comes, from beyond our walls or beyond the seas, we'll face it together. Dragons or not, it's our unity that will see us through." She considered that. In her heart, she carried the memory of Qyburn's laboratory, the nights she stood at the edge of delving too deep into forbidden knowledge. She also carried the memory of Drogon's labored breaths, the living reminder of how close she'd come to repeating her father's sins. "I will remember that," she said, meaning every syllable. He put a hand on her shoulder in quiet solidarity. They watched as Drogon and Rhaegal caught a gust of wind soaring higher into the setting sun. Their silhouettes were magnificent but no longer monstrous. They were dragons, free and alive, no longer burdened by artificial enhancements. Their roars echoed across the bay, a reminder that while House Targaryen might be reborn, it would not be shaped by the cruelties of the past. Daenerys Targaryen, having stood on the precipice of unstoppable power, chose instead to guide Westeros with caution and a measure of humility. In the shadows of the Red Keep, Qyburn might still nurse regrets over lost opportunities, but Daenerys knew this truth. If her dragons were to represent House Targaryen's legacy, they must do so free of the chains of obsession, just as she once had freed the enslaved in Essos. Only then could she honor what it meant to be the mother of dragons and perhaps finally help the realm find a lasting peace. She closed her eyes, letting the evening air envelop her, the weight of the crown balanced on her head. For the first time since stepping onto these shores, she felt more than ambition, she felt hope. And that hope, fragile yet resilient, might be the one fire that could outlast any tempest of war. Daenerys Targaryen sat in the private solar of the Red Keep, a single candle flickering on the table before her. Outside the windows lay King's Landing in all its sprawling complexity. Narrow alleys, broad squares, shops and market stalls, masses of people flowing through the capital that had once spurned her. Now it was hers, officially and lawfully, by the crown she wore. Yet the city still possessed a wary posture, as if bracing for a storm that might roll in at any moment. The air carried the faint tang of the sea, the hush before nightfall broken by distant shouts and the clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Although she had ascended to the throne weeks ago, the tension in the realm remained real and constant, a presence that shadowed every step she took. A knock came at the door, firm but polite. She bid the visitor enter, and Jon Snow slipped inside. The candlelight traced the contours of his face, highlighting the fatigue in his expression and the concern in his dark eyes. He gave her a small nod, caught somewhere between deference and the more informal bearing of a companion who had once fought beside her against an apocalyptic threat. "I heard you'd returned from the city council meeting," he said softly, keeping his hands at his sides. "How went the discussions with the merchant guilds?" She exhaled, leaning back in the wooden chair. "They came filled with grievances. It seems food prices have risen again, and they blame it on the presence of my Unsullied. They say the soldiers must eat and their wages trickle into certain pockets, distorting markets. Others accuse the gold cloaks still loyal to Cersei's memory of hoarding resources. Whatever the cause, the small folk suffer. She paused, thinking about how easily that suffering could turn to unrest. I made promises to feed them, to use the crown's coin to subsidize grain shipments. But it will take time for those measures to calm the city's worry. Jon nodded gravely. Winter's end has brought a poor harvest in many parts of the realm. The riverlands struggle with flooding from the spring thaw, and the north is still rebuilding. In the Crownlands, fields remain scorched from the last war, or trodden down by armies passing through. There's no quick solution. She studied him in silence. The candle cast shifting shadows across his features. At times, she saw in him the haunted man who had returned from beyond the wall, burdened by knowledge few wanted to believe. In other moments, she glimpsed a leader carrying a quiet nobility. I think it's time to reach out to the lords of the Reach more formally. The farmland there was spared some of the worst devastation by the wars. If Highgarden stands empty, or if it's in the hands of uncertain claimants, we might broker alliances to secure grain shipments. Jon's lips thinned. House Tyrell is gone, its last heir lost. You could offer the seat to a loyal bannerman, or confirm someone else's claim. Whoever holds Highgarden could become crucial to feeding King's Landing. Precisely, but that alone won't end the realm's doubts about me. She broke her gaze away from him, glancing at the half-open shutters. Night was falling, the final murky purple of the sky reflected in the waters of Blackwater Bay. They still remember the near destruction of this city. They remember Viserion's death and the talk of unstoppable dragons. I have to show them I'm not that kind of queen. Jon shifted his weight. You've done much already. You ended Qyburn's more dangerous experiments. You dismantled the advanced scorpions and harness contraptions, at least publicly. The people can see you've stepped back from that precipice. Daenerys felt a pang of remorse, recalling Drogon's labored breathing in the baths, Rhaegal's exhausted eyes. I only wish it hadn't come so close to disaster for me to realize how dangerous that path was. But I won't let regrets undo me. We must rebuild trust, shape a realm that doesn't live under threat of dragonfire. A soft expression briefly touched Jon's face. You're doing what you must, and you're not alone in it. She nodded, allowing that moment of closeness to hover between them. Then she rose, crossing to the window. Has there been any word from Qyburn today? Jon's posture stiffened. He disliked the man, always had, from the moment he arrived in King's Landing and learned of the experiments that had killed Viserion. Grey Worm is keeping him under guard in the castle. He's still considered your subject, and you haven't exiled him, so he's free to move about certain corridors and continue legitimate tasks. But if you're asking whether he's done anything suspicious, the answer is not yet. Daenerys pressed her palms to the windowsill. A whisper of the night breeze slipped in, ruffling her hair. He's brilliant in his grim way. I wanted to keep him close because men like him, if cast out, often find new masters to serve. But I worry about what he might be doing in the shadows. Best to keep an eye on him, Jon said. For now, at least he's parted ways with Cersei. Daenerys' thoughts flicked to the woman who once sat upon the Iron Throne. Even though Cersei was gone from King's Landing, settled in the forbidding halls of Casterly Rock, her presence lingered like a cold aftertaste. The city had not forgotten the Great September's destruction nor the brutalities of her rule. Yet ironically, it was fear of Daenerys' dragons that overshadowed fear of Cersei's return. Let her remain in that old Lannister seat, Daenerys thought. Let her brood on her own mistakes. So long as she stayed away from new schemes, Daenerys would keep the uneasy truce. She turned to Jon. I have a plan to visit the Reach in person. I'll bring a small retinue of Unsullied and some advisors, arrange an audience with the local lords. Gendry Baratheon has been forging ties in the Stormlands, I hear. Perhaps he'll join us. I'll invite representatives from the Crownlands as well, all to negotiate a stable flow of grain and goods to King's Landing. Jon nodded. I'll come with you if you wish, or I can remain here to maintain the city's peace. The North is restless, but I've asked Sansa to keep the lords calm until we can show them that your rule benefits everyone. She paused. I'd like you by my side, but I understand if you think your presence here might help hold the city together in my absence. Tyrion is still in Dragonstone sorting out issues with the Narrow Sea Lords. Varys travels the realm, sending his little birds in every direction. It seems the rest of my council is scattered. He considered. I'll ride with you. The city should remain calm enough under Grey Worm's watch, and there's no shortage of officials eager to keep the peace. If a problem arises, ravens can always find us. She felt relief that he would accompany her. Together, they might present a united front. Then we'll depart in 3 days. Let the lords of the Reach know I'm coming. We'll see if we can place a caretaker in Highgarden who will serve the crown in good faith. Once we've secured their grain, we can turn our attention to the other regions. Jon left soon after, promising to prepare for the journey. Alone again, Daenerys leaned against the windowsill, letting her thoughts drift toward Drogon and Rhaegal. The dragons had mostly recovered from Qyburn's experiments. Their scales still bore that faint metallic sheen, a testament to how far the alchemical treatments had gone before she halted them. She wondered if in time the effect would fade, or if her dragons would forever be changed in ways she only half understood. At least they remained themselves, fierce, proud, close to her heart. And at least now their destructive capabilities would not become a tool for tyranny. She cast her gaze over the bay, watching the moonlit water ripple. Sometimes she dreamt of that day she soared on Drogon's back and nearly unleashed a torrent of fire upon King's Landing. A chance choice had kept her from the darkest path. She clung to that choice like a raft in uncertain waters. When dawn broke 3 days later, Daenerys was already dressed in riding leathers, a simple silver clasp shaped like a dragon head pinned to her cloak. She opted for practicality over finery. A retinue of 200 unsullied, their spears upright, awaited her outside the Red Keep's gates. A few supply wagons followed, bearing gifts intended for the lords of the Reach, barrels of fine Dornish wine, leftover from clandestine cellars, cloths dyed in the color of House Targaryen, and coined to grease the wheels of negotiation. Jon Snow approached astride a sturdy courser, the Stark banner fluttering behind him, carried by a small contingent of northern men. Missandei, loyal and ever-poised, rode in a carriage near the center of the group, busily checking scrolls of invitation and treaties. Daenerys saw her scanning the parchment with that slight crease of concentration between her brows. Grey Worm, for his part, remained in the capital as de facto commander of the city in Daenerys' absence. The roads were safer now, but not entirely free of outlaws, so Daenerys had decided that the presence of a disciplined host was still wise. Drogon and Rhaegal circled overhead, their morning cries echoing over the rooftops. Many city dwellers paused to stare, some in awe, others with remembered dread. Yet the dragons did not descend or breathe fire, they simply followed the column as it began to move south, their great shadows gliding over the city walls. Daenerys knew that more than any words or proclamations, the sight of dragons in the sky reminded everyone who held power now. She prayed that they would also see her restraint. They traveled along the Rose Road, named for the now-faded sigil of House Tyrell. Spring buds were just starting to blossom across the countryside, though the ravages of war had stripped much of the greenery. Smoke-stained farmhouses, patches of farmland left untended, heaps of debris near the roadsides, these were the scars left behind by the pitched battles that had swept the land. Now, travelers and farmers re-emerged, warily attempting to reclaim their lives. As Daenerys' party passed, they stopped to bow or simply stare. Some recognized the dragons overhead and scrambled to hide. Others approached timidly, grateful for a chance to sell goods or beg for coin. Daenerys distributed small amounts of silver when she could, mindful of the insatiable desperation she saw on their faces. This was what it meant to rule over a land battered by conflict. The people needed more than words to heal. Jon rode alongside her, cloaked in a weathered fur despite the warmer southern air. Sometimes they exchanged words about the scenery or the needs of the realm, other times they rode in companionable silence. Occasionally, one of the Unsullied would ride up to confer on logistics, or Missandei would offer an update from the ravens that found them along the road. Late in the afternoon of the third day, they approached the outskirts of what had once been a Tyrell encampment near a stretch of farmland. Broken banners still littered the ground, unburied in the roadside mud. Daenerys reined in her horse and frowned. Jon spoke, his tone subdued. This was where the Tyrell forces tried to intercept the Lannister wagons carrying gold for the crown. Before that, there were raids and skirmishes with the Tarly forces. It seems no one's bothered to clean up the remains. Daenerys glanced at the burnt husks of wagons and scattered debris. So many lives lost for petty disputes. We must ensure the next generation doesn't suffer the same. They rode on in a solemn hush. The days stretched and the weather grew warmer. Drogon and Rhaegal flew ahead at times, sometimes returning with game they'd hunted, deer, large birds, even a wild boar once. That evening, they made camp near the Manders banks, the largest river in the Reach. Torchlight flickered as the unsullied pitched tents. Missandei oversaw the distribution of rations, and a few Northmen chatted around a campfire about the difference in southern nights. Daenerys walked among them, seeking to show her face, to share a word or two. Morale, she had learned, was a fragile thing, and the presence of a queen among her people mattered. At the edge of the camp, by the softly lapping waters, she found Jon standing alone, gazing at the reflection of the moon on the river's surface. Rhaegal dozed a short distance away, curled like a massive cat, his breath causing ripples in the nearby grass. She stopped beside Jon, watching the silvered water. "It feels strange sometimes," she said quietly, "traveling like this again after I fought so hard to claim King's Landing. Part of me expected I'd never leave that city once I took the throne, as though I'd be bound to it. Yet here I am." He looked at her, the lines of his face cast in the soft glow. A wise ruler knows their realm isn't confined to a single city. The people scattered across Westeros need to see you. They need to know you're not just an idea in a castle. She inclined her head. "I suppose the days of me riding with a Khalasar or sailing with Unsullied and freedmen shaped me for this. Movement, adaptation." She let a pause stretch. "Did you hear from Sansa? How does she fare in Winterfell?" "She sent a raven," Jon said. "She's well, though she grumbles about some of the mountain clans making trouble. They don't trust outsiders, never have, but they're doubly suspicious now that the monarchy in King's Landing changed hands. She's dealing with it, though." "Sansa is capable as always." Daenerys nodded, hearing the undercurrent of pride in his voice. "Good. The North has endured enough. I don't want them to fear me." "They won't if we keep showing them reason to trust," he replied. Then he turned his gaze to Rhaegal, letting a small, fond smile slip across his features. "He looks peaceful. I remember a time when dragons seemed like a myth. Now I can't imagine this realm without them." Daenerys followed his gaze to her beloved child. "Nor can I. They're a part of me. And yet I almost let the desire to protect them twist them into something unnatural. I'm grateful they survived my mistakes." He reached out as if to place a hand on her shoulder, then hesitated. Instead, he let his arm fall. "You've come a long way from that day. The realm might need your dragons, but it also needs your heart." She allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "Thank you." A breeze passed, rustling the reeds along the water, and for a moment the quiet closeness between them felt like a fragile promise. She was about to speak again when Missandei approached with urgent footsteps. "My queen," she said softly, inclining her head to Jon as well. "A raven just arrived. It bears news from King's Landing." Daenerys took the parchment, scanning it by the flickering light of a torch. Her expression darkened. "There was an incident in the city. A group of gold cloaks bearing Lannister sigils tried to arrest some of my officers near Flea Bottom. Grey Worm intervened. There were no deaths, but tensions flared. Grey Worm is uncertain if it's an isolated incident or part of a larger plot." Jon's jaw tightened. Could Cersei be testing the waters from afar? Trying to see if she can stir discontent in the capital? Daenerys exhaled. "Possibly. Or it might be loyalists acting on their own. Either way, it's a reminder the city isn't fully secure." She looked at Missandei. "Send a message back. Instruct Grey Worm to remain calm, use minimal force, but root out any direct threat. I can't have Lannister loyalists acting as though they still hold authority there." Missandei nodded. "I'll do it right away, Your Grace." She hurried off, leaving Daenerys and Jon once more by the river. Daenerys set her jaw. "It seems I can never escape the aftermath of the war, even from a distance." Jon put a hand gently on her forearm now. "We'll handle it. Let's secure the alliances here and then return to King's Landing as soon as we can." She looked up at him, letting out a quiet breath. "Yes, that's all we can do." They departed early the next morning, traveling deeper into the Reach. The rolling countryside gradually became more lush, the farmland more vibrant, evidence that the Tyrells had once nurtured this land well. They saw fewer burnt husks of buildings, more wide fields of barley and wheat, though some remained untended, lacking the labor force after so many men had perished. Villages dotted the roadsides, some thriving, others half-abandoned. Along the way, lords from lesser houses approached Daenerys' retinue, bowing politely and offering token gifts of fruit or fresh bread. They all carried the same question in their eyes. Would this new queen restore prosperity, or would she shatter them like so many conquerors before? On the 6th day of travel, they reached a crossroads where a grand stone sign bore the symbol of the Tyrell rose, weather-worn but still discernible. Highgarden was several days' ride west, but not far off was a broad estate that had once belonged to House Peak, a house known for its old feuds and alliances. Missandei recommended they pay a courtesy visit to assess the local power structure. Daenerys agreed. If the lesser houses in the Reach saw her making an effort to understand their needs, it might pave the way for a smoother reception at Highgarden. So they turned down a winding path lined with ancient oaks, the dragons flying overhead. Drogon circled lazily in the cloudless sky, occasionally letting out a roar that startled birds from the trees. The estate came into view at midday, a tall manor of pale stone with ivy creeping along the walls, a small orchard to one side, and a courtyard where a handful of guards in battered tabards stood uncertainly. Their banner bore the sigil of a castle tower on 3 peaks, albeit badly faded. Jon eyed the guards. House Peak has a bloody history. They sided with the Blackfire pretenders long ago. More recently, they were overshadowed by the Tyrells. I wonder how they'll respond to the new queen. Daenerys approached with measured grace, her unsullied forming a loose escort. One of the guards stepped forward, removed his half-helm, and bowed deeply. My queen, we were not expecting your visit. Lord Mallador Peak will be honored to receive you. Daenerys offered a polite smile, dismounting. She handed the reins to one of her men, motioned for the others to follow, and proceeded inside. The interior of the manor revealed a dim hallway lit by narrow windows, the stone floors strewn with simple rushes. She caught glimpses of wealth that had once been, a half-torn tapestry and ornate candelabra missing half its candles. Near the end of the hall, a man of middling years and heavy-set frame waited, dressed in a robe of drab browns. He bowed so low his jowls trembled. Your Grace, he said, trying to hide his nervousness behind formality. I am Mallador Peak. You do me a great honor. I would have prepared a proper welcome if I'd known. Daenerys extended her hand, which he kissed. My retinue and I are traveling to Highgarden. We seek alliances with the Lords of the Reach to ensure peace and stability. I've come to learn how your house fares. Mallador gestured for them to enter a modest receiving room. A few chairs were arranged around a table set with a single pitcher of watered wine and 2 cups. Daenerys noticed how little food or drink was on offer, perhaps Peak's stores ran low. She and Jon exchanged a glance, both remembering how the war had bled these lands dry. Missandei lingered near the door while a pair of Unsullied stood watch. Mallador swallowed hard as he poured wine for Daenerys and Jon. We have struggled, he admitted. The fields are slow to recover. House Tyrell is no more, which leaves many uncertain who will be paramount here. My family once rebelled, many generations past, so some suspect us of harboring ambitions. But we do not. We only wish to survive. Daenerys sipped the watered wine and found it bitter. I intend to name a new warden of the South in due time, but first I must meet with the other lords, see who is best positioned to oversee the region. If House Peak offers loyalty and helps supply grain for King's Landing, perhaps we can rebuild your holdings in return. Mallador's eyes brightened. Yes, of course, your grace. Anything that secures your favor. We are loyal to the throne. The Targaryens once ruled us, after all, before the Tyrells and Baratheons interceded. We stand ready to bend the knee. Only we have so few resources left to spare. Jon leaned forward, voice calm. Do you know of any lords in the area who might challenge this new order? We want to avoid further conflict. If there are pockets of resistance, we need to know. Mallador wet his lips. Some say that remnants of the Tarly forces still hold grudges. Randall Tarly was a staunch supporter of the crown before he fell. His lands, some near Hornhill, remain leaderless, governed only by lesser stewards. And there are mercenaries wandering about, men who once fought for the highest bidder. If they unite under a cunning leader, they could disrupt your plans. Daenerys set her cup down. She remembered how Randall Tarly had refused to bend the knee once and how she had used Dragonfire to enforce her rule. It was a memory that still haunted her. Thank you for the warning. I'll keep that in mind. As for House Peak, you have my word that if you remain loyal, the crown will not forget you. We'll see that your fields recover. Mallador's relief was palpable. Thank you, your grace. You were most generous. Jon finished his cup without comment, though Daenerys sensed his mind turning over Mallador's mention of mercenaries. In times of chaos, bands of sellswords often flourished. She had seen that in Essos. A cunning commander might pull together the scattered warriors, promise them coin and plunder, and turn them against the crown. She resolved to watch for any sign of that as she made her way to Highgarden. They departed the estate soon after, leaving behind a noticeably more hopeful Mallador Peak. Daenerys ordered her men to leave a small chest of coin, a gesture of goodwill toward a battered house. It might buy some measure of loyalty in the days to come. As her retinue rode off, she lifted her gaze to the sky and spotted Drogon and Regal drifting in lazy arcs. The horizon beyond them was a rolling tapestry of green and gold fields. Despite the war's scars, the Reach remained the breadbasket of Westeros if properly tended. Perhaps here, she thought, was the key to ensuring her capital didn't starve and that her rule endured. They made camp that evening beneath a copse of willow trees near a gentle stream. Jon organized the watch rotations with the Northmen while Missandei drafted letters. Daenerys herself walked along the stream's edge, listening to the quiet buzz of insects, the trickle of water over stone. She tried to imagine Highgarden, a place she had never seen. The seat of House Tyrell was spoken of in tales as a castle of beauty, renowned for its gardens and terraces where the roses seemed to bloom eternally. But no seat was immune to war's toll. She wondered if it now stood half-deserted, the banners torn, the fountains dry. She hoped not. In her mind's eye, she pictured a realm that still retained some measure of splendor. A queen could dream. Soft footfalls behind her made her turn to see Jon approaching. He carried 2 small cups. I found a bit of fresh goat's milk among the supplies. It's not fancy, but it's cold enough. She accepted a cup with a grateful nod. Thank you. Sipping the milk, she found it pleasantly mild, a welcome change from the bitterness of the watered wine they'd been offered at Peake's estate. Jon gazed around at the tall grasses, the soft twilight descending on their makeshift camp. We'll reach Highgarden in about 3 days, give or take. Are you prepared for what you'll find there? She took another sip, letting the taste linger on her tongue. I've faced many uncertain welcomes. The Tyrell banner men might resent me for what happened to their liege lords or for the alliances I forced. But if I can show them a path to rebuilding, perhaps they'll yield. Jon shrugged. From what I've seen, most people in the Reach care more about security than vengeance. If you offer them stability and trade, they might see sense. Daenerys lowered her gaze to the stream. Jon, sometimes I wonder if the realm will ever truly trust a Targaryen on the throne again. Even if I promise them prosperity, the memory of my father's madness lingers. And I myself used Dragonfire to enforce my claim. He placed a reassuring hand on her arm. They might never forget, but they can learn you're different, and that trust can grow slowly. You've already taken steps away from tyranny. Let them see it. She exhaled, feeling the swirl of old doubts. But she remembered how close she'd come to forging unstoppable dragons, how Qyburn's experiments nearly cost her everything. Turning from that path had been her first true test of restraint. Yes, she said quietly, I will make them see. They returned to the camp, exchanging a few more words about the route ahead. Then they parted for the night. Daenerys retired to her tent, drifting into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of rose-covered walls and black dragons perched upon them. By the afternoon of the second day thereafter, the landscape turned more vibrant. Rolling hills of wildflowers stretched on either side of the Rose Road, and the weather grew balmy. Daenerys sensed that Highgarden lay near, though they still had at least a day's travel left. A scattering of outriders approached, wearing the sigils of lesser Tyrell bannermen, though none bore the golden rose outright. They claimed to serve a knight who had stationed himself near the old Highgarden gates, hoping to keep some semblance of order. Daenerys allowed them to guide her retinue forward, though she kept the Unsullied at full readiness, uncertain of what reception awaited. As they crested the final rise, Daenerys caught her first glimpse of the famed castle. Even from a distance, Highgarden was imposing yet graceful, perched on the banks of the Mander, its walls overgrown with vines of climbing roses. Despite the obvious signs of neglect, crumbling sections here and there, soot marks from past battles, there was a unique beauty. Lush terraced gardens ringed the outer walls, though many of them seemed in need of tending. The moats sparkled in the afternoon sun. They found the castle gates open, guarded by fewer men than expected, perhaps only 24 or so. These men wore mismatched tabards, a testament to how scattered the local forces had become. One among them, a lean knight in his 50s, stepped forward to greet Daenerys. His hair was salt and pepper, and he had a scar running from his temple to his jawline. Your Grace, he said with a stiff bow. I am Ser Oliver Flowers, one of the bastards of House Tyrell. I have tried to keep Highgarden from falling into ruin after Lady Olenna's death, but we're short on supplies and manpower. Daenerys dismounted, giving him a respectful nod. You have my thanks for maintaining it. I intend to see Highgarden properly restored. Are there any rival claimants? Ser Oliver shook his head. None with a strong blood tie. Some distant cousins bicker, but none have stepped forward to claim the seat properly. We've had rumors that some lords wanted to seize it by force, but the castle's reputation kept them wary, and I've held a small garrison here. We survive on the orchard's produce and what fish we can catch in the mander. Jon surveyed the courtyard, noticing the cracked cobblestones, the empty stables, the dryness of a fountain that presumably once flowed with water. It's a large castle for so few men. Oliver nodded grimly. True enough. When I heard the new queen was traveling here, I hoped you'd bring help or at least coin. Highgarden mustn't fall to bandits. It's too important for the Reach. Daenerys weighed his words. I will see it protected. For now, my men will quarter in the outer bailey. We've brought supplies to share. In time, we'll appoint a proper warden or steward to administer it. For your loyalty, you'll be remembered. A measure of relief flickered across Oliver's face. He bowed again, murmuring gratitude. Then he waved for the gates to open fully and led them inside. The courtyard beyond was ringed by overgrown flower beds, some with twisted rose bushes that had gone wild in the absence of gardeners. Windows that once gleamed with stained glass were cracked or empty, the glass used or broken during the war. A hush lay over the place, as though the ghosts of House Tyrell still lingered in the silent corridors. Daenerys's retinue fanned out, the Unsullied efficiently establishing a perimeter. Jon conferred with Ser Oliver about potential threats in the area, Tarly loyalists, mercenary bands, or any sign of Lannister influence. Oliver admitted that some rumors suggested a small group of hedge knights prowled near Horn Hill, aiming to gather men disenchanted with Targaryen rule. Daenerys resolved to address that soon. But first, she intended to see what truly remained of Highgarden. She and Missandei explored the main keep, stepping into halls that bore faint echoes of past grandeur. Tapestries depicting scenes from the Reach's history lay half moth-eaten. A vaulted banquet hall smelled musty, its long tables covered in dust. Daenerys could imagine how vibrant it might once have been, overflowing with flowers and music, Lady Olenna presiding with her rapier wit. She felt a pang of loss for a house that had been among the last great bulwarks against Lannister dominance. Yet it was her own alignment with Olenna that ended abruptly when the tides of war shifted. That evening, Ser Oliver did his best to host Daenerys and Jon in a smaller dining chamber, setting out a meal of boiled vegetables and salted fish. It was humble fare, but Daenerys accepted it graciously. She asked him about the farmland, about the best route to contact the Lesser Lords. Oliver answered with as much detail as he could, explaining which roads were safe, which were rumored to be infested with brigands. After some time, Daenerys felt a weariness tugging at her. The day had been long, the illusions of Highgarden's splendor overshadowed by the reality of disrepair. When the meal ended, she thanked Ser Oliver, assigned watch posts for the night, and retired to one of the old guest chambers. She found Jon already waiting in the corridor outside. Torchlight played across his features, and she wondered if he'd come to discuss more about their next steps. Instead, he wore a guarded expression. I spoke to some of the men outside, he said quietly. They mentioned that a band of Sellswords was seen near Horn Hill a fortnight ago, maybe 24 strong. They claimed to serve someone styling himself as the true sword of the Reach. Doesn't sound like a Tarly, but they might have Tarly gold behind them. If they gather enough peasants who hate the Targaryen name, we could see an uprising. Daenerys clenched her jaw. I won't let that happen. But I need these lands stable. If I ride out and crush them with dragons, I only reignite the fear I've been trying to quell. Jon's eyes carried understanding. Perhaps negotiation is possible. Or we can intercept them before they gain more support, use the Unsullied to disarm them without raining fire from above. She nodded, relieved that he understood the tightrope she walked. Yes. In the morning, we'll send scouts. Then I'll decide whether to meet them or confront them. And afterwards, we must address who will hold Highgarden officially. We can't leave it in limbo. Jon parted with a low, rest well, and Daenerys slipped into the chamber. She found the furnishings simple, a bed with a carved headboard, a dusty chest, a single window that overlooked a rose garden gone to seed. The smell of stale air clung to the stones. She set her cloak aside, feeling the weight of the day pressing on her shoulders. Even though she was a queen, the tasks that lay ahead felt unending. Securing King's Landing, feeding the city, pacifying the realm, she sometimes longed for the simpler days of her youth, though in truth, her youth had never been simple. All she had ever known was survival and the pursuit of a distant birthright. She drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of wide rose fields consumed by dragonfire, of a golden-haired queen standing amidst the flames, smiling a cruel smile. When she woke at dawn, her heart pounded as if she had been galloping miles. She pushed the dream aside and steeled herself. Another day, another set of decisions that would shape the future of the Seven Kingdoms. She gathered her retinue in the courtyard, the early sunlight painting the vines on the walls in green and gold. Jon, Missandei, Ser Oliver, and a half-dozen Northmen and Unsullied joined her. Drogon and Regal perched in the outer wards, tails swishing, occasionally letting out low rumbles that startled the smaller horses. Daenerys outlined her plan: send 3 scouts to locate the Sellsword band near Horn Hill. The scouts would wear no Targaryen sigils to move inconspicuously. Should they find the camp, they would attempt to gauge the Sellsword's numbers, their willingness to speak, or any ties to the Tarly name. Ser Oliver tapped a rough map spread on a wooden crate. Horn Hill lies some leagues southeast of here. The land there is thick with forests, with a few villages scattered around. The Tarly seat itself stands on a high vantage overlooking the hills. If these mercenaries are in that region, they might have already seized or extorted the villagers. Daenerys frowned. Do you believe any legitimate Tarly heir might be rallying them? I recall hearing about Samwell Tarly joining the Night's Watch, but that leaves no official claimant. Ser Oliver shook his head. As far as I know, Samwell was the only true-born son aside from Dickon who died in battle. So it's possible some distant cousin is trying to stake a claim. But more likely, it's an opportunist hoping to rally Tarly loyalists. Jon's expression grew thoughtful. Either way, we need to address them. The Tarly name once commanded respect in the Reach. People might flock to it out of tradition. If these Sellswords cloak themselves in that banner, they could become a rallying point for unrest. Daenerys placed a hand on the crate, leaning over the map. Then it's decided. We gather information first. If it's a small group, we can attempt negotiation, offer them pardons or coin to lay down arms. If they refuse, we'll subdue them. Without dragon fire. I want no repeat of the Fields of Fire. Jon nodded in agreement. A swift takedown without burning half the countryside will show you're different from the conquerors they fear. Missandei quickly penned dispatches for the scouts, giving them the instructions. The 3 men chosen were a pair of Unsullied who could speak the common tongue passably and a northern ranger skilled at moving quietly through woodland. They set out soon after, each by separate routes, planning to return within 2 days. In the lull that followed, Daenerys turned her attention to Highgarden's neglected state. She walked the gardens with Missandei at her side, discussing how best to revive them. Old statues lay cracked among the overgrown hedges, vines choking what might once have been a labyrinth. A shallow pond had grown murky with algae. It pained Daenerys to see such a famed castle reduced to disrepair. She thought of the once proud Tyrell line that had boasted of beauty and plenty. If Highgarden could be restored, it might symbolize the realm's renewal. She resolved to spare resources for that purpose, hoping it would also appease the local lords. Later in the day, a caravan of small folk approached the castle gates. Word had spread that Daenerys was present and they came seeking justice, a farmer whose land had been raided by bandits, a miller complaining of high tolls on the roads, a mother whose son had been pressed into some unknown warband. Daenerys stood in the courtyard, listening patiently to each. Jon and Ser Oliver stood beside her, occasionally asking clarifying questions. It struck Daenerys that although she was far from the Iron Throne, she was every bit the queen in that moment, hearing petitions, dispensing relief, ordering the local guard to investigate wrongdoing. This, more than any grand speech or fiery display, was the day-to-day burden of rule. It felt heavy, but she endured it, offering fair judgments where she could. As dusk settled, Daenerys and Jon took a quiet moment atop one of the parapets, looking out over the rolling fields beyond the castle walls. The setting sun lit the clouds with bands of pink and orange. Down below, the Mander meandered through farmland that might one day be golden with wheat again. They come to you because they have nowhere else, Jon said softly. You're in the seat of the Tyrells now. To them, that means they finally have someone to plead with for help. Daenerys rested her hands on the stone ledge. Let them come. I only wish I had the power to fix everything at once. But the realm is large and there's so much heartbreak. He gave her a sidelong look. When you free people or help them, you form bonds stronger than fear. In the North, we've always said the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. You're here and you're hearing them. That will matter. She managed a small, grateful smile. For so long, she had envisioned conquering Westeros with the unstoppable might of her dragons. Now, ironically, her greatest strength might be a willingness to listen and to mend. She saw the sincerity in Jon's face and it steadied her. She wondered if the realm might have turned out differently had Aegon the Conqueror chosen to broker peace, but then again, the Targaryen dynasty was born in fire. Perhaps she was the first of her line to truly break that mold. On the second evening, one of the scouts returned, breathless and dusty, from the road. He brought news. He had located the Sellsword encampment near a small village in the foothills leading to Horn High. LL. The Sellswords numbered about 30, led by a self-proclaimed knight wearing battered Tarly armor. They demanded taxes and tributes from the villagers, proclaiming themselves the rightful protectors of the land. The scout hadn't stayed long, wary of being discovered. Daenerys wasted no time convening a council with Jon, Missandei, Ser Oliver, and a few trusted captains. "If only 30 men stand between these people and peace, we must act," she said, tapping the spot on the map where the scout indicated. "I'll lead a column of Unsullied and Northmen to confront them. But I want minimal bloodshed. We'll offer them a chance to surrender." Jon frowned. "They might not believe your offer. Men in such positions often expect no mercy." She lifted her chin. "Then I'll make them believe it. Or they'll lose their freedom. I won't have raiders preying on the innocent under my rule." Ser Oliver offered a short bow. "I'll come as well. Perhaps the sight of a Tyrell banner, even if it's carried by a bastard, will quell them." Jon nodded in agreement. "Then let's move swiftly under cover of darkness so they can't slip away." They set out within the hour, leaving Missandei in charge of Highgarden in their absence. Daenerys rode at the head of the column, feeling the old thrill of marching with her soldiers, though now, instead of conquest, she marched to enforce order. The dragons soared overhead, but she instructed them not to dive too close lest they scare the villagers. The road wound through low hills, moonlight bathing the fields in pale silver. Their torches flickered, revealing glimpses of deserted huts and abandoned plow rusting in a field. When dawn broke, they found themselves approaching the village the scout had described, a cluster of thatched roof huts around a central square where a single well stood. Smoke rose from cook fires, and a ragged group of armed men were already visible, stirring at the sight of the approaching host. One wore battered plate that bore the faint sigil of House Tarly, the striding huntsman. Daenerys halted her men at the edge of the village. Jon rode beside her, glancing at the Sellswords, who formed a defensive line, crude but determined. Daenerys urged her horse forward a few paces. "I am Daenerys Targaryen, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms," she called, her voice steady. "Lay down your arms and you will not be harmed. I know you've been extorting these people. That ends today. Any who wish to keep their lives may kneel and pledge loyalty. Otherwise, you'll face my wrath." The man in the Tarly armor stepped forward, removing his helmet to reveal a scruffy face with a wild beard, his eyes flaring in defiance. "A Targaryen queen come to judge us? You burned the Lord Tarly. You burned his son. Why should we bend the knee to you?" A low murmur ran through Daenerys' ranks. Memories of that day when she executed Randall and Dickon Tarly with dragonfire weighed on her heart. She forced herself not to look away. "I gave them a choice," she said, though the words felt hollow. "They refused. I do not wish to burn anyone else. That is why I offer you clemency if you stand down." He spat on the ground. "Clemency from a tyrant? I've heard how you tried to make your dragons unstoppable. You'd have burned half the realm if they hadn't turned on you, or so the rumors say. These men here stand for the old traditions, for a reach that won't bow to your monstrous brood." Jon raised his voice. "Rumors can be twisted. You stand against the rightful queen and you extort innocent folk. Do not hide behind the name Tarly. These villagers deserve better than your so-called protection." The man sneered, brandishing a chipped sword. "Randall Tarly was the true warden of the South, loyal to the throne until your dragons came. Someone must defend his memory. If that means defying a foreign usurper, so be it." Daenerys' blood heated. She held herself in check, recalling that older, darker impulse. In her mind's eye, she could almost see Drogon descending in a rush of flame. Instead, she drew a breath and spoke calmly. "I will not debate history with you. Surrender now, or you will face the consequences." Her Unsullied braced, spears glinting in the morning light. The Sellswords exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked ready to flee, but the bearded man barked curses at them, calling them cowards. He turned back to Daenerys with a crazed look in his eyes. "We'll die free men rather than bow to a dragon queen." Daenerys saw the moment they made their choice. Steel flashed as they charged forward in a ragged wave. She swiftly motioned for her men to form ranks. The Unsullied spears bristled, presenting a disciplined line. Jon and the Northmen spread out, flanking the Sellswords. Within moments, the clash began, a fury of metal on metal, the Sellswords trying to break the ranks, the Unsullied holding firm. Daenerys remained mounted, her sword undrawn, watching closely. She would not lose control. She had promised no dragonfire unless absolutely necessary. Drogon and Rhaegal circled overhead, roars echoing, but she kept them from attacking. The villagers cowered behind doors and fences, peering out in terror. Jon was in the thick of it, knocking swords aside with swift parries, disarming a man without delivering a mortal blow. The Unsullied fought with precision, employing the flat of their spears to knock aggressors unconscious when possible. Only a few Sellswords continued their charge with real fervor. Daenerys spotted the bearded leader bellowing, slashing at an unsullied soldier who neatly sidestepped. Ser Oliver, astride a horse, galloped forward and swung a mace at the man's sword arm, forcing him to drop his weapon. The man reeled, cursing, but found himself surrounded. He threw a wild punch at an unsullied who caught him in the ribs with a spear shaft, dropping him to his knees. The skirmish was over in minutes. Half the Sellswords lay on the ground moaning, wounded but not slain. A few had fled into the trees. Daenerys signaled her men to pursue and capture them if possible, but not to kill unless absolutely necessary. The battered leader, his face streaked with dirt and blood, glared up at Daenerys from where he knelt, pinned by unsullied spears. He spat again, defiant even in defeat. Daenerys guided her horse closer. She looked down at him, feeling the swirl of conflicting emotions, anger at his obstinacy, pity for his ignorance, and a grim satisfaction that she had subdued him without burning them all. Your men can still live. I will not kill them if they surrender and swear never to harass these people again. As for you, your fate depends on your next words. He snarled, wincing from the pain in his side. Do your worst. Burn me like you burned Lord Tarly. Daenerys' jaw tightened, but she shook her head. No. I am not the same woman who burned Randall Tarly. I will offer you mercy, but you'll serve out your days in a cell or in forced labor, repaying the villagers you stole from. You won't have the freedom to harm anyone else. He let out a bitter laugh as though mockery was all he had left. But the fight in him was gone. Daenerys turned to her men, ordering them to bind the Sellswords and secure them in wagons. Then she dismounted, striding across the churned ground of the village square. The small folk emerged from hiding, uncertain and trembling. An older woman with ragged clothes stepped forward. Your Grace, she said, bowing low. They said they were Tarly men. We didn't know what to do. Daenerys reached out, gently lifting her upright. You've suffered enough. They won't trouble you again. I am sorry it took this long for someone to hear your plight. The woman's eyes gleamed with relief. Others murmured blessings, some expressing quiet gratitude. A handful still-eyed Drogon and Regal in the sky with fear, but the dragons had not unleashed their flames this day. Daenerys looked around at the battered huts, the meager gardens. She could promise them help, seeds, tools, maybe coin from the crown. She turned to the older woman, speaking loud enough for all to hear. I will send supplies from Highgarden to help you rebuild. If any of you wish to come under the castle's protection, you may. The taxes you pay will be fair, not forced from you by men with swords. A ripple of astonishment spread through them as if they had not expected kindness. Daenerys caught Jon's eye. He offered her a small nod, acknowledging that this was exactly what the realm needed to see from her. She exhaled slowly, tension draining from her shoulders. Yes, she thought, let them see me as a queen who defends rather than destroys. She ordered her men to gather the remaining Sellswords, including the leader, who were sullen but beaten. They would be taken back to Highgarden. Some of the local villagers volunteered to help guard them, seizing the chance to show they were no longer afraid. Daenerys allowed it, thinking it would empower them to see these bandits subdued. A portion of her Unsullied would escort them on the short journey. The rest of her forces would remain with her while she visited Horn Hill itself, ensuring no pockets of further resistance lingered in the Tarly seat. Within hours, the group was ready to depart. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the dawn mist. Daenerys rode at the forefront again, with Jon at her side. They set out across the rolling hills, mindful of the watchers who might still lurk. But they found no further opposition. Horn Hill rose before them in the early afternoon. A stout castle perched on an outcropping of rock, flanked by thick forests. The gates stood partly open, and the only guard in sight was an elderly man wearing a weather-stained gambeson. He peered at Daenerys' column with wide eyes. Your Grace, he said, his voice shaking. We heard fighting. We thought more bandits were coming. You're here. Does that mean you've driven them off? Daenerys nodded. They're defeated. Are there any more of them inside the castle? He hurriedly shook his head. No. We've only a few of Lord Randall's old servants. Most fled after the war or were taken by the Sellswords. We've no lord left to guide us. She dismounted, handing her reins to an Unsullied. Stepping through the gate, she found the courtyard overgrown with weeds. Rusted training dummies littered a yard once used by Tarly soldiers. A wave of uneasy memory hit her, of Randall Tarly's proud stance, of Dickon Tarly's fear and loyalty. She had given them a choice and burned them when they refused. Perhaps it had been a lesson for the lords of Westeros. Perhaps it had been a mistake. She could not change the past, but she could shape what came next. Jon approached quietly. "What do you intend to do with Horn Hill?" She ran a hand over the old stones. "I will see it cared for until Samwell Tarly decides if he wants it. Though he took the black, so that complicates matters. If he truly cannot inherit, then we might name a caretaker. But it would be better if the Tarly line, what remains of it, remains in some way." Jon nodded. "Sam was my friend at the Wall. He never wanted the seat, but perhaps he'll appoint someone he trusts. That might be enough to honor his father's legacy without endorsing the cruelty that went with it." They explored briefly. A few dusty corridors, a great hall that smelled of stale air, empty rooms that once housed knights and servants. It was all so eerily quiet. Daenerys found a small sept in one wing of the castle. Light fell through stained glass windows depicting the Seven, the colors dim with dust. She paused there, letting the hush embrace her. Perhaps Randall Tarly and his ancestors had prayed here for strength and honor. Now only the echo of those prayers remained. At last, she rejoined the group outside. "We won't linger," she said. "Leave a token garrison from the Unsullied to safeguard the castle. Let the small folk know it remains under the Queen's protection until a rightful steward is named. That will keep bandits from taking it again." Jon and the others agreed. Within the hour, they departed, taking the same route back toward Highgarden. The sense of finality weighed on Daenerys. She had undone one more knot of chaos in the Reach. It was a small victory, but every victory counted. Once she returned to Highgarden, she would have to formalize her decisions. Who would govern this region, how the taxes would be structured, how many men would remain to defend these lands. The details of rulership were endless, but she saw them now as a necessary tapestry, one she wove to hold the realm together. When they arrived at Highgarden late in the day, they discovered that 2 more scouts had returned from deeper in the countryside, reporting further signs of smaller bandit groups, though none as organized as the one Daenerys had confronted. Missandei greeted Daenerys in the courtyard, handing her messages from King's Landing. One came from Grey Worm. Minor unrest had flared again near Flea Bottom, but the gold cloaks had mostly stood down. Another message bore the seal of the Iron Bank, politely inquiring about the crown's debts. Daenerys felt a stab of annoyance. Always the Iron Bank, circling like a vulture. She tucked that letter away for later. As the sun dipped below the castle walls, Daenerys found herself in what had once been Highgarden's famed rose courtyard. Broken stone planters lined the perimeter, but a few rose bushes still bloomed, their petals deep crimson or pale pink. She knelt by one such bush, gently touching a half-opened blossom. It reminded her how beauty persisted, even when war tried to stamp it out. She thought of the path she had taken. From the fury of wanting unstoppable dragons to this moment, kneeling before a rose, trying to piece together a fractured kingdom. She sensed Jon's presence nearby before he spoke. "This place must have been glorious once," he said quietly, standing behind her. "And it can be again." She rose, meeting his eyes. "Yes, if we show the people we're not here to rule by fear. Today I fought the Tarly loyalists without Dragonfire. When the Sellswords knelt, I showed mercy. Maybe word of that will spread." Jon studied her face, his gaze carrying both warmth and caution. "It will, and it will help, but you'll still face doubts and rumors. Some men prefer the idea of you as a monstrous queen because it justifies their rebellion. You can only answer it by continuing to prove them wrong." She managed a nod, looking at the roses once more. "I sometimes wonder if my father once stood in a garden, thinking he was doing what was right before his mind turned dark. I won't let that happen. I'll remember these small steps." He touched her shoulder. "And you have people who will remind you, if ever you stray." She felt a flicker of gratitude for that support, for the presence of someone who understood her burdens. Gently, she let her hand brush a rose petal. Its softness felt almost miraculous in this place of battered stone and half-ruined halls. "Tomorrow I want to speak with the local lords. We need to name an official caretaker of Highgarden. someone with the authority to manage these lands until a more permanent arrangement is made. Ser Oliver is loyal, but he's a bastard of House Tyrell and lacks strong alliances. Perhaps we can bolster his position or find another solution. Jon concurred. It's a good step. Then we can see about funneling supplies back to King's Landing. The city needs shipments of grain before next winter sets in. She sighed softly, the litany of tasks never ending. But she felt more certain of her path now than she ever had in those early days of conquest. The dragon soared overhead still, loyal and awe-inspiring, but no longer a shadow of dread upon her soul. With each moment, she learned how to be a queen not just of fire, but of compassion. It was a delicate balance, but one she believed she could maintain, so long as she remembered the lessons of her mistakes and the ideals that drove her forward. As darkness deepened, she and Jon walked back through the castle corridors. A hush descended on Highgarden, interrupted only by the distant clank of a blacksmith's hammer or the murmur of soldiers settling in for the night. Daenerys passed the old Tyrell banners hanging in tatters along the walls, thinking of Olenna Tyrell's last stand, the bitter parting words she had spoken about House Tyrell's downfall. The ghost of that formidable lady seemed to linger in the quiet corners, reminding Daenerys that every seat in Westeros held stories of triumph and tragedy. They reached the small solar where Missandei waited, a candle lighting her careful notes on a spread of parchment. "Your Grace," she said, bowing her head, "I've compiled a list of potential candidates to oversee Highgarden, minor lords and knights who have expressed loyalty to the crown. Would you like to review them now?" Daenerys glanced at Jon, exhausted but resolved. "Yes, let's do it. The sooner we set a caretaker, the sooner we can move on to the next challenge." Missandei spread out the list, names scrawled in neat columns, each with a brief summary of background. Daenerys sat scanning them. Jon stood behind her, occasionally leaning in to read. Some were older knights with local influence, others younger lords from the surrounding counties. Ser Oliver's name appeared, along with a note that he lacked legitimate birth but had local sympathy. Daenerys considered them all carefully, mindful that any choice might cause resentments or feuds. An hour passed, punctuated by quiet discussion. At last, Daenerys rested her hand on the parchment. "I'll name Ser Oliver as Castellan of Highgarden. He may not be a true-born Tyrell, but he's proven his dedication. With crown support, he can hold the seat until we arrange something more lasting. If the local lords challenge him, I'll mediate." Jon nodded. "It's a fair choice. He knows the castle best." Missandei made a final note, relief evident in her posture. "I'll prepare an official decree for your seal. And once that's done, you can decide whether to remain here a while or return to King's Landing. The shipments of grain must be arranged, but I can handle some of that in writing." Daenerys tapped a finger on the table. "We'll remain a few more days to oversee the initial steps. Then we'll ride back to the capital. The city needs to see we haven't abandoned them. And with these Tarly loyalists scattered, the immediate threat is gone." When the meeting concluded, Missandei gathered her notes and left. Daenerys lingered, standing by a small window. Jon hovered near, as if sensing she needed a moment. She gazed at the dark sky, the faint stars overhead. Somewhere out there, her dragons roost, watchful guardians. The wars had left so many fractures in the land, but she felt she was slowly bridging them piece by piece. "You've done well today," Jon said quietly. "They'll remember that you offered mercy." She inhaled, thinking of all the times she had not offered mercy in the past. "One day, perhaps the realm will see me as more than a conqueror." She turned to him, letting her tone soften. "Thank you for your counsel." He offered a slight, earnest smile. "I do what I can." For a moment, she thought of the complexities that lay between them, his status as a Targaryen by blood, something that once threatened to complicate her claim. But they had chosen to set that aside to focus on healing Westeros together. Maybe that was the only path forward. They parted ways soon after, each to their own thoughts. In the privacy of a candlelit chamber, Daenerys laid aside her cloak and sank onto the bed, exhaustion pressing down. Images of the day flickered thr. Oof her mind, the Sellsword leader's hate-filled eyes, the small folks' gratitude, the battered halls of Hornhill. She remembered how close she had come to letting Qyburn enhance her dragons into unstoppable engines of war. If she had done so, would this outcome have been the same? Would she have incinerated those Sellswords without a second thought, or torched entire villages suspected of harboring them? Would the realm have turned against her in terror? Instead, she was here, forging a new story for House Targaryen, one that might someday eclipse the horrors of the Mad King. She closed her eyes, letting the gentle sound of night insects lull her. The next days would be filled with further tasks, but for now, in this quiet moment, she allowed herself to hope that her dragons and her dream could coexist without destruction. Hope was a fragile ember, easily snuffed out by fear or cruelty. But she would guard that ember, let it grow into a flame that warmed rather than consumed. And if she succeeded, Westeros might finally know a peace that endured beyond the clash of kings and queens. Morning arrived with pale light streaming through cracked shutters. Daenerys roused quickly, donned practical garb, and set about her final tasks in Highgarden. She met with minor lords who answered her summons, showing them the official decree appointing Ser Oliver as Castellan. Some muttered about his birth, but Daenerys' unwavering stance and the presence of her dragons circling overhead convinced them to begrudgingly accept. She promised them that once the harvest came in, she would see to it that grain shipments reached King's Landing in exchange for the crown's protection and fair payment. A few were bold enough to question the price, but Daenerys repeated that her taxes would be moderate, used to rebuild roads and fortify the region against outlaws. Let them see a queen who negotiated rather than demanded, who valued order instead of chaos. By midday, she stood in the courtyard to witness Ser Oliver's formal investiture. Missandei read the decree in her melodic voice, and Daenerys sealed it with the wax bearing her sigil, the three-headed dragon. Oliver bowed before her, stammering pledges of loyalty. She saw sincerity in his eyes. He had no illusions that this was a position of great power, only a responsibility to maintain Highgarden until further arrangements. After the brief ceremony, Daenerys took his hand, leaning in to speak softly. "Rule with fairness, Ser Oliver. Let the people come to you as they did to the Tyrells. Restore the gardens if you can. The realm needs beauty as much as it needs grain." He nodded, a flicker of emotion on his face. "I will, Your Grace. I'll make you proud." She managed a small smile, then stepped back. Her retinue began preparing to depart. Jon oversaw the final logistics of the journey back to King's Landing, while Missandei exchanged letters with local stewards. Word would spread across the Reach that the Queen had returned stability to Highgarden. Not by burning enemies or unleashing unstoppable dragons, but by carefully choosing her steps. It felt both momentous and strangely understated. The usual chaos of war was absent. Could that be how real peace was forged quietly, one settlement at a time, until the realm realized it had changed? They rode out from Highgarden in the late afternoon, the sun casting elongated shadows across the road. The castle gates swung shut behind them, the Tyrell banners stirring in a faint breeze, a sign that life within those walls would go on. Daenerys felt a surge of relief. The column of Unsullied and Northmen snaked across the countryside. This time, Drogon and Regal flew closer, occasionally landing in fields to rest. Farmers gawked but were not attacked. The small folk offered timid waves, some even dared to approach with baskets of fruit. In return, Daenerys gave them coin or kind words, letting them see her not as a conqueror but as a queen traveling her lands. The journey back to King's Landing took just over a week. They moved deliberately, stopping in villages to spread the news that Highgarden was secure and the Queen was encouraging trade routes to reopen. She sent messages ahead to Grey Worm, letting him know her progress. Whispers reached her that the city had quieted somewhat, that the rumors of unstoppable dragons had begun to fade, replaced by talk of the Cell's word band she had dispersed without burning. In time, perhaps people would realize she was not the second coming of the Mad King. On the final day, the city's walls rose on the horizon under the hot sun. Daenerys' heart quickened at the sight of that sprawling metropolis, perched along Blackwater Bay with its mismatched rooftops and throngs of humanity. She wondered if the tension she had left behind still simmered or if her presence would quell it. Her escort's arrival caused the gates to open swiftly. The gold cloaks, now loyal to the crown, formed neat lines to salute her. She rode through the winding streets, noticing again the mix of fear and awe in the faces of the citizens. Yet some of them seemed genuinely curious, recalling rumors that she had shown mercy in the Reach. She prayed the curiosity would transform into acceptance. Inside the Red Keep, Grey Worm greeted her at the gates. He bowed, pressing a fist to his chest. "My queen, it is good to see you return. There have been a few incidents, but nothing we could not handle." She dismounted, letting stable hands lead her horse away, and briefly clasped his arm. "Thank you, Grey Worm. We have matters to discuss, including how we'll distribute the grain that the Reach Lords have pledged. But first, I want to ensure the city knows stability is near." He inclined his head. "As you command." Jon came up behind her, dusted from travel, scanning the courtyard. Tyrion Lannister stood waiting near a column, having recently arrived from Dragonstone. The dwarf advisor watched Daenerys with a mixture of relief and a hint of dryness in his voice. "Welcome back, Your Grace. Congratulations on not raising the Reach. I'm sure the realm appreciates that." Daenerys raised an eyebrow at his mild sarcasm. "Thank you, Tyrion. I trust you've had successes of your own in the Narrow Sea." He shrugged. "Success is a strong word. I convinced a few lords that paying taxes to a Targaryen queen might be preferable to the usual blockade and plunder. Baby steps, as they say." He turned to walk with Daenerys through the keep's corridors, their footfalls echoing on the stone. "And from what I hear, your baby steps in the Reach were equally meaningful. People are talking about how you subdued a band of rebels without flambeing them." Daenerys gave a small, rueful laugh. "Yes, apparently that's worthy of celebration. One day, maybe it won't be so surprising that I spare my enemies. But we have more pressing business. My to-do list grows with each mile I travel." Tyrion's tone was wry. "Ah, the joys of governing. Shall we gather the council?" Soon, Daenerys, Jon, Tyrion, Grey Worm, and Missandei convened in the council chamber. A large table stood in the center, covered in maps of Westeros. Daenerys took her seat at the head, glancing around at the faces that had become her core advisors. Varys was absent, likely still traveling, though he sent messages via his little birds. She took a moment to gather her thoughts, then began. "I've secured Highgarden. The local lords are cooperating to send grain to King's Landing. They understand the crown will offer fair compensation and protection. Ser Oliver Flowers serves as castellan for now." Jon leaned in. "We also ended the immediate threat of Tarly loyalists near Horn Hill. The region should stabilize, provided we remain vigilant." Missandei produced a document. "Here is the proposed plan for receiving shipments of grain over the next 3 months. We'll need wagons, guards, and a system to store it in the city's granaries." Grey Worm nodded. "The Unsullied can protect the convoys. We'll place them along the Rose Road at intervals." Tyrion tapped a finger on the map. "This is promising. If the city sees stable bread prices, the mood will improve, which in turn reduces the risk of riots or opportunistic plots. Also, it might discourage any remnants of Lannister loyalists from rising up." Daenerys glanced at Grey Worm. "You mentioned a few incidents in my absence. Has there been any sign that Cersei's men are trying to undermine my rule?" Grey Worm shook his head. "No direct sign of her. Some gold cloaks still hold a fondness for House Lannister, but they've caused minor squabbles, nothing more. We keep them in check." Tyrion shifted uncomfortably, as though the mention of Cersei churned up old guilt. "She's sequestered at Casterly Rock. It's unlikely she'd risk returning here without an army. Still, we shouldn't ignore the possibility she's spinning webs from afar." Daenerys exhaled slowly, thinking of the letter from the Iron Bank. "We have another concern. The crown's debts remain." The Iron Bank wrote again, inquiring about repayment. "If we ignore them, they might fund potential rivals. I'd rather not give them that opening." Tyrion grimaced. "Indeed, the Iron Bank can be formidable. You might consider negotiating partial payments to keep them at bay while we rebuild." Daenerys nodded. "That's one of our priorities. We'll also need to invest in restoring farmland around the Crownlands. If we rely solely on the Reach, we risk becoming too dependent. I'd like to see if Storm's End can provide assistance as well. Gendry Baratheon has been making strides there, I hear." Jon added, "We might also open trade with the North in a more structured way. Sansa has access to resources, furs, timber that could be traded south in exchange for southern goods." Daenerys allowed herself a small lift of the lips. "Yes, we'll do that. Step by step, forging alliances through trade and mutual benefit, not just fear of my dragons." They discussed various logistical points for the next hour, hammering out the details of storing the incoming grain, ensuring fair distribution among the city's wards, and updating the tax records to reflect new conditions. Daenerys found the tasks both tedious and oddly satisfying. It was like stitching a torn tapestry, slow, painstaking, but necessary if the realm was to stand united. By the end of the meeting, she felt a tempered sense of accomplishment. This, she realized anew, was real ruling. Not flamboyant conquests or fiery speeches, but patient labor that shaped the bedrock of her people's lives. When the council adjourned, she asked Tyrion to linger. Jon offered a polite inclination of his head, then left with Grey Worm, presumably to coordinate the arrival of supplies. Missandei slipped out with her ledger, leaving Daenerys and Tyrion in the quiet chamber. The midday sun streamed in through high windows, casting diagonal lines of light across the table. Tyrion eyed her thoughtfully. "You seem more at ease, Your Grace, than when you first arrived to claim the throne. May I ask how you feel about it all now?" Daenerys folded her hands. "I feel like I've only just begun to understand what it means to be queen of this realm. It's not about the Iron Throne itself, but the countless lives under it. The illusions of unstoppable power have faded, and I'm grateful for that in a strange way. There was a time I thought raw might would solve everything. It never does." His gaze flickered with a hint of admiration. "That's a lesson many rulers never learn. It's good you have. You'll find it easier to earn respect when your people see you can lead with wisdom and restraint." She inhaled. "I hope so. Qyburn's experiments nearly pulled me down a path I wouldn't have recognized. I still keep him close enough to watch, but I no longer rely on his brand of knowledge." Tyrion nodded, lips pursed. "I've heard he's mostly quiet these days, cooped up in some corner of the keep. Good riddance, I say, though a watchful eye is wise. Men like him seldom lose their fascination with the dark arts." Daenerys rose from her seat, crossing to the tall windows that overlooked the capital. The city stretched below in its messy sprawl, sunlight sparkling on the waters of Blackwater Bay. "I want to see the day when King's Landing is known for peace and prosperity, not for the tyrants who sat the throne. If the people trust me, if they can go about their lives without fearing dragonfire or wildfire, maybe they can rebuild from all they've suffered." Tyrion joined her, standing at a respectful distance. "I once said you were a revolutionary, come to smash the wheel. Now you're trying to build something better in its place. That's far harder than mere smashing. But you have it in you." She turned to him, letting the sunlight frame her features. "Thank you, Tyrion, for standing by me, despite everything." He inclined his head, voice lowered to genuine warmth. "We've both lost much in these wars, and we've made mistakes. But if we keep learning, perhaps we can leave a better world behind." Daenerys gazed out over the city, hearing the echo of gulls, the distant hum of thousands of lives. Her dragons soared somewhere beyond the walls, free yet loyal, no longer twisted by alchemical tampering. In her mind, she pictured them as guardians perched above the realm, powerful but tempered by her love rather than her fury. She thought of the Sells-Words kneeling in defeat, of the small folk who dared to hope, of Jon Snow's steady presence at her side, reminding her of the fragile line between justice and vengeance. A hush of possibility settled in her chest, a hope that perhaps the worst was behind them. With a final glance at the city that was now her charge, Daenerys Targaryen, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, turned away from the window. She had work to do, and she would do it without the madness of unstoppable dragons or the bleak shadow of her father's legacy. One choice at a time, she would break the cycle of fear. She carried the blood of the dragon, but she chose to be something different. And in that choice, she found a glimmer of promise for herself and for all Westeros.